St. Vladimir's, which is just north of New York here. It's up in kind of near Rye or Scarsdale. And it was this incredible experience because I got to work on my languages. I learned a lot about leadership, actually, at the seminary because there's some pretty extraordinary individuals there. And then there is no doubt about it. You are there to study to become a priest. And while that was not my driving reason to go there, they kind of, it's a little bit like Michael Corleone. They kind of drag you in, and before you know it, you're suddenly thinking about becoming a priest. I didn't become a priest because then I moved on and started my doctoral work in philosophy up in Boston, and did not complete that because the family business called, and I had worked in it during the summers up until then, and with mom and dad and my two sisters, and all of a sudden I found myself no longer thinking about exams and a dissertation and all those things, and thinking about this really cool business.
So let's talk about this business. The hagiography is your parents, Frank and Louise.
Yep.
They started Haggerty Insurance Agency in Traverse City, Michigan, for what I never would have guessed was an actual business. Collector wooden boats.
That's right.
Are there enough collector wooden boats to sustain a full business?
There are enough wooden boats to sustain a very small family business, with a few employees. It was kind of a retirement gig for my mom and dad. They had a general insurance agency and they sold that, and they wanted something else to do, and they thought, but there were a couple of principles that were in the back of their mind, which was they wanted a national business instead of a local one. They wanted one that was in a niche rather than like sort of general purpose. And they wanted one that could have like real sustainability over a long period of time. So wooden boats was an unoccupied business space. So literally unmet need. They matched the unmet need with an interest in that underlying interest in wooden boats and in cars. My dad was a wooden boat, vintage boat guy, and also a car guy. And so, this was just the fun, combining the business knowledge with a passion. And again, my sisters and I kind of all helped out when it was much smaller. And we kind of stumbled into the car insurance business, which was much, much larger than the wooden boat business.
Even the collector car business is orders of magnitude.
Oh, orders of magnitude larger. Millions of vehicles.
But let's not jump quite far ahead. You and your dad used to work on cars, rebuilding projects. You mentioned you had a couple of side hustles, lawn mowing, things like that.
Yeah, my apple orchard.
You spent $500 buying a 1967 Porsche 911S when you were 13.
Yes.
I wouldn't be allowed to buy a car at 13. I was lucky I had a bike. And then you and your father rebuild this.
That's right. I will also note it was the only really good car deal I've ever done in my life. So, just for what it's worth. So,
I'm going to assume that was the spark that started your enthusiasm for cars.
It was. And, my dad was a do-it-yourselfer hobbyist restorer guy in the garage. And both my sisters also restored cars. They were older than I was with him. And then I was the third along. And we convinced this older gentleman in our town to sell us this 911S for $500. And I had to mow an awful lot more lawns and to sell a lot more apples out of my orchard to buy the parts to restore the car. But by the time I could drive, it was ready. And
good planning.
It was great planning. And I can tell you, there was nobody in my high school driving a Porsche. So I would sneak it into the teacher's parking lot because no one would believe that a student had a Porsche.
That's right. That's hilarious.
But it's also like back then in the 80s, cars like that were not expensive. They were not considered to be necessarily that valuable. They were just kind of cool older cars. And so we kind of approached it as a family like, hey, you can get a lot of car for not a lot of money and you can have something really fun to enjoy. And so that was just my life growing up. And
I love that the 300 SL from the 50s were being sold at a depreciated price in the 60s and 70s.
Oh, of course.
It's astonishing.
Well, the most valuable car today, people will tell you, is a Ferrari GTO, 1962. They're worth, tens and tens of millions of dollars. But in 1970s, you could buy them for $15,000. They were nothing. And now they're $50 million, $60 million.
Unbelievable. That 911S you restored, still have it?
I still have it. Yeah.
Still drive it?
Of course. It's my first car out every season and the last one I put away.
Wow, that's amazing. We could spend a lot of time talking about what else you drive and like. We'll get to that later. I'm curious, when did you first realize Haggerty could become something a whole lot larger than a niche wooden boat insurer?
Well, we had already started the boat or the car business in the early 1990s. I've had a couple of aha moments, and this one, I remember it like we were sitting here today, and it was the fall of 1995. I was doing my doctoral work in Boston, and we were reading Plato's Republic in Greek. Okay, so I'm up in Boston College. We're working on Plato's Republic in Greek. That's a big slog.
Yeah,
a lot of Greek,
imagine.
I can tell you. And I was trying to help out the family business kind of from a distance, and the challenge with insurance, insurance is an incredible industry. It's stable. There's a lot more interesting stuff to it than people think, but it is just not very sexy to talk about.
Right.
Nobody loves talking about insurance. And even with these big brands and stuff today, they still don't want to talk about it very much. And so I was literally sitting in this Plato's Republic class, and on the side of my notebook, I wrote this thing if we would just stop acting like an insurance business and start acting more like a club for car owners, it would just transform the conversation that you're having with people, because then you're acting more like a car person instead of an insurance person trying to sell a car person something. And I literally wrote this idea of turn Hagerty into a car club. And I wrote it in my notebook, and I closed my notebook. I went home that night to my apartment, and I dropped out of my PhD program.
Right then and there.
And I went home the next week.
Well, let me validate that. Not that you need, as a public company, need my validation. Full disclosure, I have a few of my cars insured with Hagerty. I'm a member of the club. I get the Drivers Club magazine. But it's obvious in hindsight, of course, you're going to focus on this niche that is kind of ignored by the major insurance companies. How challenging was it to convince the rest of the fam, hey, this is the way to go? We're not an insurance company selling to car collectors. We're car people satisfying checking a few of their boxes.
It took me a few years.
Yeah.
We were a very close family. It was really fun to work together with everybody in those early days. My dad retired after kind of that late 90s. My mom retired shortly thereafter. I was working with my sisters. So they kind of gave me enough rope to go test it out, that if we just changed the dialogue and acted we're going to build an automotive branded business that happens to sell insurance, and we're going to do it around this membership concept. It wasn't like no one had ever done something like that. If you think in the early days, AAA was kind of like that. The Motor Club, they kind of, they're very different than that now. If you were to even think of something like AARP, which is, a different sort of segment, there is they're in it. They sell a lot of insurance, and they treat this group of people. USAA, serving military people and families. Nobody had ever done it in a business like ours. And so it took a little while to convince them that was the way to go to market, and we could change the way we were thinking. But you mentioned something, there was another piece in this, which was the next aha. And the next aha was that most of these cars were insured by the big insurance companies. So think State Farm, Allstate, today, Progressive, Geico, everybody. And, we're a little company. We're a tiny family business. How the heck are you going to compete against these monsters? And so after we got the club kind of up and running, I realized, well, what if we just partnered with these companies rather than competing against them, and said, look, we're going to do one thing and one thing only. We're going to be expert in these cars. We know the customers really well. We're building a really big, rich bunch of data. And what if we partnered with them? And so the first big partnership like this, we landed 23 years ago, and that was with Allstate. And Allstate's huge company. I knew they insured hundreds of thousands of these cars.
Spin out from Sears so long ago.
Exactly. Lots of interesting things in that company. And I met the CEO at the time, and just through kind of people helped connect us. And I said, look, I think I can make you better at this one tiny little thing if you just give us a chance. And they're still a partner today, that program grows every year. And now we've just moved through the entire insurance industry. We've partnered, virtually with all of the big insurance companies. And so today, if you go, insure your home and your auto and everything with one of them, but you have a vintage car, collector car, whatever you want to call it, that usually comes to us. And so the big scalability of the business was, one, show up like a club, like this member organization. Two, partner rather than to compete. And if you can because if you're small, it's impossible to compete against a huge company. But if you partner with them, it changes the game.
Well, when you say it's impossible to compete, one of the fascinating things about insuring an old vet or an old Porsche is, any of the big firms are going to charge you $1,500, $2,500 a year. You guys all right, so I have a 67 vet, which is actually my least favorite car to drive. I want to say...
Which motor? I got to ask.
The 327, but with a stick.
Yep.
Nassau blue over white.
Very nice.
Spectacular.
Very nice.
But it's a pig to drive. But it doesn't matter because I think Progressive, it was like $2,200. You guys were $500 and change. Yeah. Coming up, we continue our conversation with McKeel Haggerty, CEO of the specialty insurance firm, talking about how he built the company into a $1.5 billion revenue driver. I'm Barry Ritholtz. You're listening to Masters in Business on Bloomberg Radio.
And I'm Monica Ricks in the Bloomberg newsroom. Here are some of the stories we're watching. President Trump says the U.S. will continue talks with Iran, but considers the ceasefire between both countries to be over. Bloomberg's Dan Williams has more from Israel.
I think this is largely about Hormuz, and I think it's largely about Trump being very personally upset, miffed at the open displays of defiance and hostility toward him that we saw in that week-long funeral for the slain supreme leader of Iran, huge banners in English threatening bluntly the killing of the U.S. president.
Trump says 1,000 missiles are locked and loaded if Iran follows through. The U.S. is also demanding Iran issue a public statement declaring the Strait of Hormuz open to all shipping without threats amid an ongoing fuel supply crunch. Russia and Ukraine attacked each other's key grain export gateways overnight after shipping across the Sea of Azov was disrupted the previous day. That triggered a spike in wheat prices. Here at home, the lawyer of several men who survived an ICE shooting in Houston this week that killed Mexican builder Lorenzo Salgado Araujo says no officer was threatened despite Homeland Security's claim that Araujo rammed an ICE vehicle. Border's Tom Homan says they're waiting for this investigation to play out.
Is there cell phone videos? Like what happened in Minnesota, there was actually a city camera captured something. So let the investigation play out. If the officers acted outside policy or illegally, they'll be held accountable.
The officers involved were not wearing body cameras. Democrats are now scrambling to find a replacement for Graham Plattner, who's officially withdrawn from Maine's U.S. Senate race following rape allegations. The deadline is July 27th. And there are no longer any active members on the U.S. Election Assistance Commission. Bloomberg's Amy Morris tells us President Trump has effectively relieved all 3 serving commissioners.
The commission is supposed to have 4 members. 1 seat was already vacant. President Trump fired the 2 Democratic members. The remaining Republican member was allowed to resign. The commission's bipartisan mission is to help election officials improve the administration of elections and help Americans participate in the voting process. But with the midterms around the corner, the agency now can't take any action until the president nominates new members and the Senate confirms them. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Monica Ricks, and this is Bloomberg.
Stacey Vanek Smith here from Everybody's Business. This week on the podcast, we talk about the shortage of fun.
We're kind of shrinking into our homes. We feel less connected. We feel more left behind. We get angrier. You look at consumer sentiment data, which we've talked about on this podcast. People are really kind of mad. And I think it might be that we're enjoying our time together less and we're spending less time together.
Listen to Everybody's Business from Bloomberg Business Week on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
On a recent edition of the Odd Lots podcast, Joe Weisenthal and Tracy Alloway speak with Barclays Global Head of Equities Tactical Strategies, Alexander Altman, on the levered ETF shaking markets all over the world.
You specifically use the word terrifying to describe the amount of notional exposure coming from levered ETFs. Can you give us a little bit of context about how big this market actually is now?
I'll give you the numbers straight away. And markets are moving really quickly. So these numbers change a lot every day. The number itself is actually not enormously terrifying at all. I would just say the asymptotic growth of the AUM over the past few months has been somewhat sensational. or it's just meteoric. So just to put some numbers behind that.
Yeah.
If we look at, say, the Korean market, at the beginning of the year, Asia Pacific AUM was somewhere around about 12 or 13 billion. That's now around about 50.
Sorry, just wait. The AUM within these levered ETFs.
Of levered products.
Of levered products in Asia. They are now around about $50 to $55 billion. So talking about a threefold increase or plus over a relatively short period of time. And here in the US, if you take the beginning of April, which was, of course, the local lows for the market, we were talking around about 120 odd billion here in the US, and that's now increased. I think at its peak it was just north of 200 billion. And what's really interesting is that if you look at the US market, it's not like you've actually seen significant inflows and share creation in that space. Most of that AUM growth has been because of price performance.
Oh, interesting.
Whereas in Korea, you've actually seen huge share creation on top of meteoric rises in the share prices.
That's what's on a recent edition of the Odd Lots podcast. Listen to the full episode on Apple, Spotify, the Bloomberg Business app, or anywhere you get your podcasts.
You're listening to Masters in Business with Barry Ritholtz on Bloomberg Radio.
I'm Barry Ritholtz. You're listening to Masters in Business on Bloomberg Radio. My extra special guest this week is McKeel Hagerty. He is the chairman and CEO of Hagerty Collector Car Insurance. The firm insures every collectible vehicle and a handful of boats for more than almost 3 million collectors. So 2025 revenues of $1.5 billion, $1.3 billion in written premium, a record 371,000 new members, net income plus 91%. This is a real publicly traded company, HGTY.
Yes.
Wow.
I used to have hair when we started all of that, but things are going well.
So I guess if you're not pulling your hair out of your head, you're not public. Let's talk about how you've driven this. One of the interesting insights that seems to have shaped your strategy was that collector cars aren't just financial assets; they're emotional assets. You describe them as favorite toys. How did that shape how the firm developed?
Well, we started in the simplest possible way, which we were an insurance agency. You might have mentioned that even early in the first intro, and that's true. That's the easiest way to kind of get into one of these things. As I mentioned, we started with kind of a specialty product, which was insuring special cars. The insurance policy forms were unique. Our pricing, we had a unique approach. We had this drivers club model that, started really helping that compounding aspect of it. But one of the big pieces that I guess I dreamed of is that if we actually started taking real risk and became the insurance company itself, not just an agency selling policies for somebody else, it would be the same customer coming in, but we'd have so much more of a chance to, really build the revenue behind it. So the other big piece after, if my first aha was Drivers Club, second aha was, really realizing we needed to partner rather than to compete with the big insurance companies. It was how do we start taking risk? So that's been a multi-year, really decade-long journey that we started in 2017. Got that up and running, and it was really a big key piece of how we went public in 2021. And that is that we were going to, everybody knew we had a unique angle on this market, that our economics looked great in the business, but that we could realize even that much more. And so that's really been the next big piece of all of this. And it all kind of compounds on itself, because if you insure a car, we use the club to kind of engage people. You mentioned reading the Hagerty Drivers Club magazine. I mean, that is, by the way, I don't think the word insurance is mentioned in that magazine.
No, not
anywhere.
at all.
It's a car magazine. And
it's cars and roads, really.
Yes. And it is the now highest circulation car magazine in the world.
No kidding.
It is, yeah.
I did not know that.
Yes.
That's really interesting. So the evolution from insurance to an automotive lifestyle brand, it goes beyond the club membership, goes beyond the magazine. Events, auctions, valuation data. Walk us through how that all evolved.
Yeah, I think, and I was a big fan of car magazines. I was a big fan of automotive media. I mean, that's how I read my way into understanding the car world and going to events. So, and I always remember somebody told me once that if you're gonna go into a niche business that you're really proud of, you kind of need to have the high ground on your side. And for me, the high ground was if I could have a media property that where we would, kind of have that intellectual high ground, that would help. The other piece is the data aspect of it. When I was, growing the business and team, we have incredible teams. We're out there trying to figure it out. Valuing these cars was so tricky because there was a lot of opinions about what cars were worth, but not a lot of really good data. And so, as we were investing in the media pieces, talking about cars and entertaining people, we built the data resources. We call it our automotive intelligence group. We have by far the richest sets of data about how to value these things. And it's down to that VIN or serial number. You mentioned how does a big insurance company, why didn't they do it? And I remember this conversation years ago in one of those partner discussions where I mentioned the CEO was a car guy, really wanted to kind of compete with us, wasn't sure if he wanted to partner with us. And I said, well, do you know what a 1969 Camaro is? And he said, I sure do. He's kind of pretty happy with himself. And I said, you may not know that in 1969, the Camaro came in 147 different variants.
Wow.
And that year, the least expensive one was worth about 11 grand. And the most valuable one was worth about 1.1 million. And you can't tell the difference by looking at them from the outside. You have to understand what that serial number is. And I said, we built a patented serial number decoder for all cars pre-1981 so that we could understand our universe and start providing that data. And that's why our partners like us, but it's a real asset to have that kind of data and then build on it every year. You mentioned 371,000 new customers. We'll do quite a bit more than that in 2026. Those are all it's not just insurance or revenue. It's also data coming our way. What are people buying? What are they insuring them for? What do they sell? When somebody sells a car, it's also a data point. And so for us, that kind of data piece, and again, it's all a big, not just because I'm a car person, I view it as a flywheel. It's a flywheel and it all kind of spins, and insurance is a beautiful thing, but the rest of it speeds up the flywheel.
Yeah, to say the very least. So the valuation tools you have are really interesting. The bull market list you have has become very influential. I actually reference some of your valuation tools in a chapter on my book on selection bias. Every time some car goes for a new record high, there's always a bunch of media coverage, and they talk about, look at what a great investment this is. And it's like, no, that's all survivorship bias. Show me the other 10. Don't show me what was the best car of the past 50 years. Right. What car are you going to buy now to put away for the next 50 years? Yes. That's a much harder question because you don't know the answer. But your valuation tools have been really helpful, that sort of stuff. How did you build that capability? Is it simply just, hey, every data point we come across from clients, we're going to suck into a database and figure out?
That was exactly it. I mean, if most media outlets that weren't part of our world, if they were covering the space, they were using a lot of anecdotal information, kind of dealer-fed information, or just looking at public auctions. And I love public auctions too. Like, you can learn a lot from watching what all the different auction companies do. And now with so many good online places, it's like even more data. But what we realized with our scale is like we just had way more data points than all of that. Because again, people buying cars, insuring them with us, adding, deleting. It was just this big flow. And yeah, it took a lot of people a lot smarter than I am to build all the, not just the database stuff, but the analytics capability around it. And now with AI, it's even better. And then as we started realizing we could get other data sources that help us validate even more, not just in the U.S., but outside of the U.S., it's really been a fun part of the business. I'll tell you what, it's a smart team, and I love learning from them. They teach me stuff every day that I need to know.
So you mentioned auctions and online auctions. In addition to Bring a Trailer and Cars and Bids and P-Car, you guys are now going to get into online auctions for your clients' cars, or are you just partnering with someone?
Oh, no. We have our own Hagerty Marketplace platform, which is online auctions, and then also
you've had online classifieds for a long time.
Yes.
How rapidly is the auction side growing?
It's growing rapidly. No, I mean, we have such a supply we have way more supply than you think. And if you think about some of those other great companies, like Bring a Trailer's been such a darling in this space, Cars and Bids, the number 2 in the U.S. But there's a supply and demand balance that everybody has to strike, because if you flood a digital marketplace with too much supply, then the bidders go away. And so and if the bidders go away, then nobody's happy. The bidders won't put their cars on it. So it's a fast build, but it's steady. The live auction side of the business, Broad Arrow, which was an acquisition we did after going public, that's a remarkable business because I had followed that industry for a long time around the world, but it's all about getting the right team. And in my mind, because I'm very protective of our brand and our reputation, we had to have the kind of team that wasn't prepared to build the number one live auction business, but they have to do it in a way that I'm proud of. And I'm not saying that, it's all good or bad, but I wanted to be very proud of the outcome because things will go wrong. You have to make things right for customers. Sometimes cars that people bring to you to sell aren't described exactly as they actually are. And you have to find that out and politely tell them, well, I'm not sure this is $1 million car. It's a $100,000 car. And, sorry, if you want us to sell it for $100,000, we will, but we're not selling it for $1 million because it's our reputation too. And so again, the way I think about it now is most people come to us to insure a car. Then they buy the membership thing and we engage them and do media and a lot of fun stuff, invite them to our events. And about every 7 years on average, somebody buys or sells a car. And that's where I want to be there and present in their minds so that we help them in that transactional side. And plus, you've probably been to auctions or watched them on television. They're fun. Car auctions are super fun. It's live, it's vibrant, it's interesting. Sometimes there's multi-million-dollar cars up there selling that you can't even believe anybody would pay multi-million-dollars for this car. And we do that too. I mean, that's why we have Broad Arrow. We connect it with some of our Concours events in many cases. They're around the world. We just had our Broad Arrow auction at the Concorso at Villa d'Este, the Villa d'Este Concorso d'Eleganza. And that was a really successful sale and super cool place to have an auction right on Lake Como.
Yeah, in Italy.
In Italy.
Looked beautiful.
Yeah.
You've been a judge at Pebble Beach for a while. I know
25 years. I think this is my 25th year.
And I know there was an affiliation with one of the local concourses here. Maybe it's Greenwich?
Greenwich, yeah. That is an event we own. So we produced that just recently. So
yeah, that's it's too close to a holiday weekend. Otherwise, I would be there.
Oh, you got to come.
We'll circle back to that. I'm also a big fan of your YouTube channel. I really like Jason Camisa's work. I've learned a lot about cars that I think I know, and then he does a deep dive into a particular model, and I'm like, I didn't know that about the Toyota Supra. Who would have guessed? How did YouTube become such a major part of your brand?
Well, it's one of it's really the de facto platform for people watching kind of introductory level automotive content. And obviously lots of brands are putting stuff out there. But what we realized is if you think about the big sort of arc of how people have learned about or consumed automotive media, where it's shifted since the 90s was magazines were, the main platform for a long time. Then when you got, the first dedicated, cable network, which was Auto Week, Speed Vision. You got some of those. You started seeing auctions on there. But then a lot of that content started migrating to YouTube. But what I wanted to do was do it like as the same high quality like we were doing in the magazine. So hire total pros, shoot the stuff really well, great cameras, great locations, all of that.
Coming up, we continue our conversation with McKeel Haggerty, CEO of the specialty insurance firm, talking about how he built the company into a $1.5 billion revenue driver. I'm Barry Ritholtz. You're listening to Masters in Business on Bloomberg Radio.
This is your only 24-hour source for world markets and breaking business news. Bloomberg Radio. Coming up, the latest market-moving headlines from Bloomberg. First, an update from our partners at ABC News.
ABC News, I'm Brian Clark. The New York Times says several of its journalists were subpoenaed Friday by the Trump administration after they reported on new security concerns involving the new Air Force One jet. Lawyer for the Times said this should shock the conscience of any American who believes in the Constitution and press freedom. So far, there's been no response from the White House. Meta responded to critics after the debut of its new AI features, says ABC's Andrew Dimbert.
Just 3 days after unveiling new AI tools that could have turned public Instagram posts into AI-generated images and videos, Meta is now pulling the feature entirely after a wave of criticism from users, privacy advocates, and even the entertainment industry. Meta saying in part, we've heard the feedback that this feature missed the mark, so it's no longer available.
Apple sued OpenAI in federal court in California, alleging ChatGPT's parent company stole its trade secrets. And the CDC says another American's been infected with Ebola while working in the DR Congo. This is ABC News.
And I'm Monica Ricks in the Bloomberg newsroom. Here are some of the stories we're watching. Apple is suing OpenAI for trade secret theft, accusing the company of a coordinated campaign to steal information, including drawings, components, and other materials about upcoming products. Mark Gurman's covering this story for Bloomberg and says OpenAI has lured away more than 400 former Apple workers.
The people running the hardware division over at OpenAI are three of the most senior people in Apple's design history, that being Johnny Ive, the head of design, that being Ting Tan, Apple's former VP of design in charge of the iPhone and the Apple Watch, and now he's the chief hardware officer.
Apple's seeking a jury trial in this case and also wants OpenAI to redesign upcoming products so they don't include any of its technology. In a statement, OpenAI says it has no interest in other companies' trade secrets. Wall Street notched a second week of gains. Here's Bloomberg's Charlie Pellet.
Traders drove stocks higher in the countdown to the earnings season kicking off next week, with SK Hynix jumping 13% in its debut. Oil declined as investors sifted through the latest geopolitical developments. Next week will bring us earnings from 6 of the biggest American banks. For the week, the Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 0.5%. NASDAQ Composite Index up for a second week, gaining 1.7%. Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Radio.
Delta Airlines reaffirmed its full-year profit guidance, citing strong demand for premium, corporate, and international travel. The airline's revenue rose 14% from a year earlier, but its adjusted fuel expense was up 77% from a year ago due to the war in Iran. CEO Ed Bastian jumped on an analyst call this week and talked about rising costs, not just for fuel.
But the cost for labor is up, the cost for airports are up, the cost for technology is up, planes you can't get, and if you can get them, their costs are higher.
He says all of that means ticket prices will likely remain higher. And MGM Resorts International is now said to be engaged in deal talks with Barry Diller's People's Inc. after Diller offered to acquire the part of the casino company he doesn't already own. The Wall Street Journal reports a proposal was made June 1st to buy the remaining 26% of the company, which would value MGM Resorts at about $12.4 billion. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Monica Ricks, and this is Bloomberg.
Up to the minute market headlines.
The stock story of the day is NVIDIA.
The trend line is good for jobless claims.
Along with in-depth research on more than 2,000 global companies.
Some of these big tech names, are these entry points?
What does renewables investment look like in the U.S.?
The Bloomberg Intelligence Podcast with Scarlett Fu and Paul Sweeney.
How do you broaden out the AI play?
Listen live weekday mornings at 10 Eastern on Apple CarPlay or Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app or on demand wherever you get your podcasts.
Get the latest headlines from our nation's capital every weekday. Hi, I'm Joe Matthew.
And I'm Kaylee Lines, inviting you to join us for the Balance of Power podcast.
Every weekday, we deliver unbiased insight and analysis on the latest news from the White House and Capitol Hill,
along with in-depth conversations with lawmakers and the people making policy and shaping our world.
Get the straight story without the spin.
Listen and subscribe to the Balance of Power podcast on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere you listen.
From the state courts.
Tell us a little about the facts of the case.
To the Supreme Court.
Can Congress force a judicial code on the justices?
June Grasso delivers your legal intelligence.
Multiple lawsuits were filed against the emergency rule.
The Bloomberg Law Podcast.
Is the toughest hurdle for prosecutors proving Trump's intent?
Listen live weeknights at 6 Eastern on Apple CarPlay or Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app or anywhere you get your podcasts. Bloomberg Podcasts. Context changes everything.
Donald Trump is shaking up the global economy.
I will sign a historic executive order instituting reciprocal tariffs,
rewriting the rules, moving markets, even rupturing long-standing alliances. To understand what's happening, listen to Bloomberg's Trumponomics podcast. I'm Stephanie Flanders. Every week, I bring you laser-focused conversations with experts from Wall Street, Washington, and beyond. Listen to new episodes every Wednesday and follow Trumponomics wherever you get your podcasts.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. Americans are paying more than ever before for new vehicles, around $50,000 on average, and paying the most ever on their monthly payments.
We are getting some pretty dangerous levels of 84-month loans. We're seeing monthly payments of like $777 on average, which is like record-breaking stuff.
That's Ivan Drury, senior analyst of insights at the auto website Edmunds.com. One problem he sees again and again, a lot of auto buyers, no matter how strapped they are, keep buying and financing new cars, even when they still owe thousands on their older vehicles, putting those loans underwater and spending way more than they should. So, could automakers make more affordable sedans and smaller SUVs to help those struggling buyers?
It's hard to blame the automaker when consumers show up and instead of buying base trim level or smaller vehicles, they buy fully optioned or they go for a bigger and better.
Tom Busby, Bloomberg Radio.
Bloomberg Radio, on demand and in your podcast feed.
On the latest Balance of Power podcast, we talk with Trita Parsi from the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, as President Trump says the ceasefire with Iran is over.
It's not that there is an impossibility to get back to talks. There already seems to be some significant efforts. It's that this memorandum period was supposed to be used to actually help build some confidence between the two sides so they could strike a final deal. But so far, it seems that this effort has been a confidence depleting effort rather than a confidence building period. And that's very problematic because ultimately that makes it more difficult to get a lasting deal at the end of this.
President called the regime scum this week, among other interesting names. Clearly, there's no trust on our side of things, and that's probably deserved. Do you believe or expect that Iran will trust Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff enough to make a deal?
No, I don't think either side is going to trust the other. And as you mentioned, the U.S. has now attacked Iran twice in the midst of negotiations, including killing their supreme leader. So trust is beyond what we can expect, but one can trust the incentive and interest of the other side to be a guide of how they will act. And if there's a deal that actually is good for both sides and it's better than the alternative, then you can trust that they will follow their own self-interest in a rational way and stick to it. That's the sweet spot that the two countries have to find.
Hear the full conversation on the latest edition of the Balance of Power podcast. Subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Plus, listen anytime on the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com. You're listening to Masters in Business with Barry Ritholtz on Bloomberg Radio.
I'm Barry Ritholtz. You're listening to Masters in Business on Bloomberg Radio. My extra special guest this week is McKeel Hagerty. He is the chairman and CEO of Hagerty Collector Car Insurance. The firm insures every collectible vehicle and a handful of boats for more than almost 3 million collectors. There's a quote of yours that I have to start with because I really like it. The best piece of advice is to buy the car you want to drive and then buy the best example you can afford. This may sound obvious, but not all vintage cars drive the way people hope they would. So there's nothing in that I disagree with. Discuss.
Yeah, I think there's so many people that they envision someday when they have that little bit of extra resources, that's going to be my toy. I want to get into the car world. And if they weren't 100% in this their whole life, or their parents weren't into it, or you didn't have an uncle or somebody in your life who let you drive in these things, I often recommend people try to get a chance to drive what you think you want, because the older cars do drive very differently.
Yes.
And even if you think of, say, muscle cars from the 60s, they were very fast. I mean, these are cars that are
in a straight line.
In a straight line, a lot of power. They do not stop or turn as well as you think. And you just have to get used to that. I mean, I love cars of all generations. I love driving very early cars. I have some newer cars. And I always just have to kind of center myself when I get behind the wheel to remember, like, okay, this is not my Porsche Taycan, which is, like this incredible piece of technology, electric car. It's a vintage internal combustion car with funky brakes, and you have to be ready for it. So I always recommend people drive them and recognize that maybe it had air conditioning, maybe the air conditioning doesn't work. It doesn't matter. Like, roll down the window and just enjoy yourself.
Manually roll down the window. I tell the story. The Vet, the 67, it's a lap brake, a lap belt, not a 3-point belt. They couldn't be bothered to put a passenger side mirror on. No. Because, what are you even going to see? And the steering is just beastly. But I also like the concept of buy the best example you can afford. And I find myself constantly saying to people, a cheap Aston Martin is the most expensive car you could possibly buy. Yeah. But people don't really get that. Yeah. And they're, look, different eras of cars come with their own challenges sometimes. I think as we're seeing this onslaught of new generations coming in and wanting to buy slightly newer cars. I mean, it's 60 whatever % of all of our, new quotes and new cars coming into the space are all like relatively newer cars, 1980s, 90s, 2000s cars. Some of those cars, for example, it may not be a mechanical issue that can drive you a little crazy. It's an electrical issue that'll drive you a little crazy. If you think of, some of the screens and the CD players and all the little control things that back in 1990, whatever was, the biggest whiz bang feature. Well, it doesn't work so well anymore. The car runs fine, but, you're not going to be able to use the antiquated nav system. I just tell people relax. It's fine. And, enjoy the car, drive it. All my kids always ask well, does the radio work in this thing? I'm like, I have no idea. It's never been on. I'm there to drive. And it's such a fun activity, as to just enjoy driving a car for pleasure. And I also tell the first thing I tell people who's sort of new to the space, I want to take it out to dinner. And I'm like, make sure you take it out during the day first a few times, because sometimes cars leave you in the restaurant parking lot at night. So people always ask, why don't you drive them? And I'm like, because I'm not sure I'm going to get home. If you're used to modern cars, you will be shocked at how terrible the headlights are on, forget 60s, 80s era's car. Those were not really great headlights.
They weren't great. They're not dangerous or anything. You just have to be aware that they don't have all the modern technology.
Well, when all the headlights were that way, you just said this is what the lighting is, and you had to be aware of it.
That's right.
It's when you go backwards, you take a lot of things forget the blind side warnings and the backup cameras. Just your expectation of field of vision is so different. So it's
a different kind of attention, driving a vintage car.
It's much more focused.
It's more focused, and I love it. And I encourage people, just try it out. It's a great experience.
So what are some of the bigger trends you're seeing in collecting? What's changing these days?
Well, again, big story, contrary to, data that we were reading a few years ago, is the next generations are absolutely into cars. They like them. They're just into different kind of cars than our parents were, or we were probably.
Well, doesn't every generation sort of lust after the cars from the high school parking lot?
I think that's right. They did. And they're different. And one of my little cottage industry things that I do is if I'm ever driving anywhere near a high school parking lot, I look to see where the young car people park their cars. And they usually park them in the back of the parking lot, not up near the school. And they all park next to each other, so they go hang out afterwards. And what you're going to see right now with the 17 and 18-year-olds car people in these high schools is, you're going to see BMWs, you're going to see Audis, you're going to see some, various performance Japanese cars. You're not going to see anything fancy. They can't afford them. But that's the cars they're starting with. Trucks are, of course, another big entry point, and it's been another huge trend. So not just pickup trucks, but kind of vintage SUVs. So Jeeps are still right now one of the hottest brands. It's huge. Of course, Broncos are one of the hottest things. Of course, if they can afford them, depending on it, a Land Rover or International Scouts. These are the cars that people are interested in because so many cars today are SUVs anyway. And so the vintage version of them are one of these kind of more off-road vehicles. And there's a big industry of modifying them, making them work a little bit better. And so that's another big trend. So again, next generation trucks, I guess I would say. I mean, flying over the top of the whole industry, which, you know, at the top end of the market. And just to add on to the answer to your question is, you know, the ultra luxury kind of supercar manufacturers are making more cars than ever before. And so you think of those brands like Ferrari or Lamborghini or Bentley or, you know, even Porsche, my beloved 911S. Those companies are just building a lot more cars and pumping them out into the market at price points that were different than they used to. So, you know, when Ferrari or Lamborghini were building hundreds of cars a year, well, now Ferrari's a 14,000 unit a year manufacturer. Lamborghini, when you add their SUV in, it's an 8,000 or 9,000 vehicle manufacturer. I mean, when I was a kid, you never saw a Lamborghini unless you just happened to be in Beverly Hills or Palm Beach or something. And now they're everywhere. I mean, even in my little town in northern Michigan, there are a couple Lamborghinis driving around. I'm like, oh my goodness, you know, that's amazing. And
what's crazy is where I live, I'm 15 minutes from a Ferrari dealer, 2 Porsche dealers, the Bentley Lambo dealer, and I take it for granted. I see these cars all the time, but as a kid, you hardly ever saw these around.
You wouldn't have.
Like a Porsche was a exciting thing.
It was. So they are building my next generation of customers. Mm-hmm. Every one of these manufacturers are like my best friends because they're building the cars that I will be insuring this year and 25 years from now.
So your boy Jason Camisa mentioned he's only a manual driver. I embrace that. Makes the car even that much more difficult to steal. But I'm curious, amongst the trends in collecting, I've been hearing about a move towards analog, towards manual, away from the big dominant screens. What does your data say?
Well, it's true. And in fact, you know, you think about some of those very same supercar manufacturers that, you know, they signaled years ago, we're getting rid of manuals. You know, everything's going to become this super electronic sort of driving experience.
Faster on a track.
Faster on a track. Yeah. PDK. I mean, I think, and they are. And by the way, the one nice thing about the PDK, if you drive them in the winter, like I happen to love driving Porsches in the winter, PDK is pretty nice in the snow for what it's worth. But setting that aside is I'm just totally impressed that many of these car companies are kind of going back on what they said they were going to be doing and starting to not reintroduce manuals, but they're producing another, you know, extra model with the manual in it.
At a very high price. You look at the Porsche STs or the Sport or all the GT3s. If you want a manual, my GTS was the last year it came with a manual, which was 24. And the Turbo, I think 2013 was the last year with a manual, something like that. So it's amazing they took the supply away and said, all right, if you want a manual, we'll give it to you, but it's $300,000.
Yes. And what they saw is they were looking at the auction data, like from our auction companies and others, and suddenly the manual version of something.
Premium, huge
absolute premium.
So there's a data point you guys have referenced I want to ask you about. Quote, we estimate that approximately 12 million enthusiast vehicles will transfer to a new generation in the United States over the next 15 years, either via estate plans or inheritances. What is this generational handoff from, I guess we could call them boomer collectors, to millennials and Gen Z? What does this mean for the car collecting community?
Well, and I think we've all read that there's this huge, you know, gigantic wealth transfer, whatever the headline number is. I've heard
65 trillion.
I've heard 100 trillion, you know, 70. And, you know, our estimate just on that number of, you know, 13, you know, million vehicles, 12, 13 million vehicles is about $570 billion worth of car value. Right now, most of those are held in, you know, the hands of the generation of baby boomers. I'm an older Gen Xer. Gen Xers are starting to come into their peak wealth, past peak earnings, into peak wealth years, buying a lot of cars. But 15 years from now, about a third of that whole market will come loose back. And we're seeing this. Certainly the entry points are different than they were a generation ago, where people are interested in sporty cars, trucks, younger kind of, young timer cars, as they refer to them in Europe. We're seeing the data. We want to position ourselves well to see that the transfers are kind of smooth, where you're kind of helping the next generation get into these cars. We're actually doing things like teaching manual driving classes because, if you talk about it, it's not just an anti-theft device or some slow hobby like brewing beer or whatever it is. We need to teach the next generation how to drive manuals, and it's not that hard to do.
Thank you, McKeel, for being so generous with your time. We have been speaking with McKeel Hagerty, Chairman and CEO of Hagerty Specialty Insurance. If you enjoy this conversation, well, be sure and check out any of the 648 we've done previously. You can find those at YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Bloomberg, wherever you get your favorite podcasts. I would be remiss if I didn't thank the crack team that helps us put these conversations together each week. Alexis Noriega is my video producer. Sean Russo is my researcher. Anna Luke is my podcast producer. I'm Barry Ritholtz. You've been listening to Masters in Business on Bloomberg Radio.
Broadcasting 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. Powered by more than 3,000 journalists and analysts in over 100 bureaus around the world. This is Bloomberg Radio. Now, an update from our partners at ABC News.
From ABC News, I'm Brian Clark. Federal agents served subpoenas on New York Times journalists who had reported on security concerns involving the new Air Force One. Lawyer for the newspaper said this should shock the conscience of any American who believes in the Constitution and press freedoms. The Justice Department says its targets are not reporters, but those leaking classified information. Potential threats from Iran forced the president to change his plans, returning from Turkey after the NATO summit last week. But even though the U.S. and Iran traded fire, there's still hope for a long-term deal, says ABC's Martha Raddatz.
A senior U.S. official saying that the Iranians said firing on the ships was a mistake, an errant part of the Iranian regime that was trying to undermine the deal. We screwed up. Let's keep talking.
Elsewhere in the Middle East, Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna says he was detained by Israeli settlers during his visits to a West Bank village on Thursday. He said,
"These hoodlums come in with machine guns, an M4, an American-made machine gun, and they detain us. They block off the road. And then they call the IDF, and the IDF is on their side, not on the side of the Americans."
His group was eventually allowed to pass. There were multiple water rescues Friday in Missouri amid dangerous flooding, says ABC's Morgan Norwood.
A state of emergency in Missouri after life-threatening flash floods swept through the region. Amy Wigard and her cousin Dawn were camping with a large group of friends and family in Lesterville.
We got out of the campers and the water was up past our knees.
When she says before dawn, floodwaters rushed away their 8 campers and 3 other vehicles.
We were just in total shock, didn't think this was really happening.
Fortunately, everyone in the group accounted for.
The CDC says another American's been infected with Ebola while working for a humanitarian group in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. There are more than 1,800 confirmed cases in the region. You're listening to ABC.
Now, Bloomberg Radio weather on SiriusXM 121.
Showers and thunderstorms will be causing some afternoon travel problems for folks headed to and from the St. Louis area. Temperatures in St. Louis around 90. We'll have problems for folks heading in and out of Nashville this afternoon. Highs are going to be near 84. Houston, look for delays due to scattered showers and thunderstorms this afternoon. In Houston, temperatures will be near 91. You may also have some problems getting in and out of the Pensacola area this afternoon due to showers and thunderstorms. Highs are going to be near 90. We'll have showers and thunderstorms delaying travelers to and from Charlotte this afternoon. It'll be near 92. If you're headed to or from Columbus, Ohio, there'll be delays due to showers and thunderstorms, 89. Later this afternoon, showers and thunderstorms will start delaying travelers heading in and out of the Baltimore and Washington area. Temperatures in Baltimore and Washington should be around 88. I'm Rob Carolyn, and that's your Bloomberg Travelers Forecast. Now back to the latest headlines from ABC News.
The housing affordability bill became law overnight, even without President Trump's signature, as he had refused to sign it because Congress did not pass his strict voter ID bill.
This housing bill passed with overwhelming support from Democrats and Republicans. Plus, it hits at one of the biggest issues for Americans right now, the cost of buying a home. And this bill aims to lower the cost by boosting supply, making homes cheaper to build, and restricting Wall Street investors from buying up single-family homes. And yet, Trump torpedoed the planned signing of this bill 10 days earlier, calling the bill a, quote, big yawn.
That's ABC's Selena Wang. There's a parasitic disease in 31 states, often spread by produce. The gastrointestinal problems could last for weeks, but experts say there are ways to reduce the risk of illness.
Cyclosporiasis is something you don't want. The diarrhea can last for weeks. Previous outbreaks have been linked to raspberries, basil, cilantro, snow peas, and salad mixes. Experts say instead of buying salad mixes, get a head of lettuce and peel off the outer layer. Washing fruits and vegetables in vinegar can help. That taste can be washed away in a salad spinner with water. And don't forget to wash the cutting board and the counter. Wayne Cabot, ABC News.
There's a family reunion in England. King Charles met his grandchildren, Archie and Lilibet, for the first time in several years, along with their parents, Prince Harry and his wife Meghan, amid an ongoing rift in the royal family. I'm Brian Clark, ABC.
And I'm Monica Ricks in the Bloomberg newsroom. Here's some of the stories we're watching. Apple is suing OpenAI for trade secret theft, accusing the artificial intelligence startup and its hardware chief of engaging in a coordinated campaign to steal information about upcoming products. Mark Gurman wrote the story for Bloomberg News.
Apple saying that OpenAI actively coached employees at Apple on how to leave Apple and how to join OpenAI without creating suspicion that they're taking confidential information with them. Obviously, the backdrop here is that Apple and OpenAI, before this lawsuit, were going to war over AI devices.
OpenAI says it has, quote, no interest in other companies' trade secrets, but Apple's demanding OpenAI cease its practices, destroy any proprietary material, and redesign upcoming products so they don't include any of its technology. Wall Street scored some gains to end the week, thanks in big part to a strong market debut of memory chip maker SK Hynix. Shares of the company closed up 15% after raising $26.5 billion with its American depository receipt offering. SK Hynix says it plans to use those funds to expand chip manufacturing and potentially bring some of that memory production here to the U.S. Meantime, the Trump administration plans to ease export restrictions on the United Arab Emirates, allowing it to buy advanced technologies, including semiconductors for AI. That rule change means the UAE no longer needs a U.S. license to purchase cutting-edge AI chips from companies like NVIDIA and Advanced Micro Devices. The Wall Street Journal reports MGM Resorts is now in deal talks with Barry Diller. Bloomberg's Ed Kalegi has details.
MGM Resorts has been negotiating a potential deal with Barry Diller's People Incorporated after the media mogul offered to buy the casino giant. MGM set up a special board committee and lined up advisors to help evaluate the proposal. MGM believes Diller's offer undervalues the company. Diller is being advised by bankers including some at JP Morgan Chase who are working to pull together financing for the deal. Diller, whose company already owns 26% of MGM, offered $48.30 a share for the rest of the company on June 1st, valuing the company at around $12.4 billion. MGM has yet to publicly respond to the offer. Ed Kalegi, Bloomberg Radio.
Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Monica Ricks, and this is Bloomberg.
Wall Street prepares for the latest read on inflation.
Overall inflation continuing to climb for consumers.
Will core CPI rise and raise concerns about a Fed rate increase?
Is it a sea change for the rates are going higher crew?
Instant reaction on Bloomberg surveillance.
In line with expectations, but it's higher.
Inflation in Focus. Tuesday morning at 8:30 Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay or Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. And always on Bloomberg Radio. Context changes everything. Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Podcast Spotlight Hour on Bloomberg Radio.
Welcome to the Odd Lots podcast on Bloomberg Radio. I'm Joe Weisenthal.
And I'm Tracy Alloway.
Today you are listening to our conversation with Scott Patton, the Aldi U.S. Chief Commercial Officer. We are talking about how a grocery store can reduce prices by reducing variety. Tracy, can I tell you something? I don't know if I've brought it up on the podcast before, but I love grocery stores. I love visiting different kinds of grocery stores. I love produce aisles. Mm-hmm. I like seeing new ones. If I'm in a rush or whatever, it's not so pleasant, but I really like grocery stores.
How often do you do the weekly grocery shopping, Joe?
Well, so we usually buy online, but I go to Key Foods, which is in my neighborhood probably once or twice a week for things. And I actually, even those quick runs, I actually enjoy. Obviously, unboxing is not fun, and there are aspects of it that are fun, but as an interesting experience, and I like food. I
will say, I'm starting to become cynical about the American grocery experience, which is terrible because I didn't go to American grocery stores for a really long time. So
what years are you talking about? When you were in Japan?
So I grew up in Japan. I remember going to grocery stores when I came back to Chicago in middle school and just being absolutely wowed by the variation that was there. Right. Literally a kid in a candy store running down the cereal aisle going, oh my God, I've never seen any of these things before. Doing the whole, what's the famous...
The Yeltsin thing. So you could get how at least they spark joy.
Of course.
Okay.
Of course. But now I think I take them as an accepted.
Yeah.
Because now I'm sort of...
you get yourself, for sure.
I shop a lot at Walmart.
Yeah.
In Connecticut, which is sometimes a soul-sucking experience. I shop a lot at the grocery store that we're about to discuss. I shop a lot at the nearest grocery store in Manhattan.
Which one's that?
That one's a Morton Williams.
Okay. Yeah.
And that one, I'm trying to be diplomatic. Depressing. The price. I ran in there once and I grabbed a cup of soup, freshly made soup, because I was having dinner, a girl dinner, basically. $12 freaking.
The Manhattan specific grocery experience, I would say uneven to put it best. There are some decent ones, but there's a lot of places that are high-end and expensive and low-end and expensive. You know what I'm saying? You go to these places and they're sort of shabby and they're dirty and stuff like that. You're well, at least I'm getting a deal. And then it's actually, no, it's just a worse experience and also it's expensive.
This reminds me also when my husband first came over from the States to join me here in New York, the first place I took him to was the Whole Foods on Columbus Circle.
Oh, really?
Because I just wanted to show him, look at this grocery store. Crazy.
There's a new Wegmans at Astor Place, which is where I get off. And I really expected that to become part of my routine because that's where I get on the subway. I like it. It's cool and they have a lot of stuff, but it hasn't become part of my routine. So there's opportunity still, I would say, for the better Manhattan and just the better grocery store experience still.
It is very true that Manhattan has a shortage of, let's say, lower priced grocery stores, right? We've got the Whole Foods. We have Trader Joe's. Maybe that's true. The closest, but we have a lot of Whole Foods, a lot of Wegmans. I'm not even going to mention what's the one with the G.
Oh, Gristedes.
Gristedes. There we go. Gristedes, Morton Williams, places like that. But we don't really have,
no,
we definitely don't have a Walmart.
Well, in Texas, we have H-E-B, which everybody loves. That's one of the most beloved brands, I think, in the region. They're super, and they're huge, and they're clean, and they have good prices, and incredible variety, and a sushi bar and a barbecue pit in the store. Anyway, there's a new grocery store opening up. We're recording this June 18th. Tomorrow, as of the time we're recording this, but tomorrow, right in Times Square, right adjacent to Times Square, there's a brand new Aldi, which is, I guess, where you shop sometimes when you're in Connecticut.
Yeah, so this is very unusual in my mind because you wouldn't expect a giant grocery store to open just off Times Square. Yeah. I think the new location is something like 25,000 square feet, which is just absolutely huge.
Especially for that area.
I can't even imagine actually finding the space for something like that. And then secondly, you wouldn't necessarily expect, I don't want to say a discount grocery store, but a lower priced grocery store that competes squarely with the Walmarts, the Costcos of the world.
Totally. And they are, I think, substantially cheaper. I searched this. They claim that they're cheap, but also the third party.
We should just say, we already went on a tour of the new location.
Yeah, we're a little biased because also they gave us a tour. So this is their disclosure. They gave us a tour and they had all these little snacks out for us and stuff like that. So I'm already predisposed.
But on the plus side, we have personally witnessed ground Wagyu beef for $5.99. It does exist.
But I haven't tried it yet. Anyway, let's get to the conversation. Let's talk about opening a grocery store. Let's talk about like how do you actually wring prices out of the system, because that is the story and that is what's exciting for us. We're going to be speaking with Aldi U.S. Chief Commercial Officer Scott Patton. Scott, welcome to the podcast. We saw you yesterday inside the new Aldi, and now you're here on the podcast. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, and so glad you could make it out to the store yesterday. It was a really awesome experience to walk through, really, Times Square. Aldi right off the Times Square. Amazing.
Let's just talk about what does the Chief Commercial Officer do? Tell us about like what's your actual job and your career at Aldi.
So I actually started with Aldi over 30 years ago. I've been through all the various operations from running stores to running a warehouse, and I joined the buying department about 11 years ago. So I'm responsible for all of the products in the stores, and that's what I do. We work with the teams who develop the products and get them onto the shelf.
So tell us about the new location, because as we were discussing, Times Square, not necessarily an intuitive place to start a giant grocery store.
Yeah, so Midtown Manhattan, that's our second location in Manhattan. You're right, it's not intuitive.
Where's the first one?
First one is up in Harlem.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have 14 in the 14 in the New York area. One in Harlem, Midtown now, and another opening in Harlem next year, and 2 blocks off of Times Square. You're right. It's a very unique location for us, but a lot of traffic. We have a lot of tourists. We have a lot of commuters. There's going to be a lot of e-commerce, and it's just a great location.
It's a cool space. What was there before, do you know?
It's a brand new building. It's a brand new building with residential on top, and we've taken the ground floor.
Do you think that's an appeal? Like, I think I would like to live above a grocery store. It seems like a nice, like, amenity.
It's great. I mean, there's going to be residential above us and unbelievable apartments, and to have that convenience for the people who live there, it's going to be great.
Yeah, a lot of cities in Asia, as you know now, have mixed-use buildings.
Yeah, I love that.
So much
I think
more, like some of them even have daycares on the bottom, and then the grocery store, dry cleaner. Like you take care of your entire life within one compound.
I'd be totally down.
Yeah. So the Times Square location, I get that there's a lot of foot traffic, but how much of it is just creating a showcase for the Aldi brand in an area where you know there's going to be a lot of visitors, a lot of tourists, versus how much of it is the expectation that this is going to be a really busy location that's actually making profit?
There's no doubt that having that visibility is going to be great for the brand. But to be fair, we intend to be very profitable at the store. We're going to have a ton of customers. That would be a very expensive billboard if we weren't going to sell a lot of groceries.
We've done a few like produce episodes. Mm-hmm. We recently did an episode on tomatoes with one of the senior VPs at Beldor. That was an amazing conversation. We did a conversation a few years ago about the Hunts Point Delivery Distribution Center in New York and maybe why it's not the optimal sort of node for delivery. What is the supply chain between, for example, when we entered the store, we were like in the produce aisle and tried some blueberries that are very nice. Why don't you walk us through what is the supply chain from like where that grape comes from to where the distribution center is to the store and that journey?
And that's a prime example of how we buy a bit differently. So we have over 2,600 locations. So what does that mean is we can't just buy from the local market. We start with the grower. I have the opportunity in my role to visit the growers. So we've been to the grape growers in California, in Mexico, in Chile. And it really starts probably 3 to 4 years in advance in partnering with these growers. We go to the fields, we try their varieties, they're all sampled out, and we decide as a company which varieties do we want them to grow for us. From there, they start growing, we have the contracts, and they grow specific plots dedicated to our business. So of course we have the harvest, it goes straight from the grower into our distribution facilities, and then to our stores often the next day. So it's a complicated supply chain, but the key to success is going all the way back to the origin. So whether you're growing grapes or berries or apples, those relationships with the farmers and the growers, that's actually what makes it special.
But in terms of the actual distribution into New York, because we've had conversations with not just grocers, but people who are trying to build things in New York, and they talk about how hard it actually is to get bulky things into the city. Yeah. How are you trucking in, I assume, truckloads of groceries every day, and where are they coming from?
So we come from South Windsor up in Connecticut. We have a truck that comes over. We come at night because of the congestion. And you're right, it's very difficult to get a truck, especially into Midtown. And we have to have a bit of a shorter truck. We actually have to have 2 drivers.
Did you say a bit of a shorter truck?
It's a bit of a shorter truck because they can't hit the turning radiuses. Oh, yeah, so, for instance, at this store, when the truck comes in to deliver, it's a shorter truck. There's 2 drivers. One to kind of guide and watch the parking and make sure we can cut the radius back in. Another one to unload the groceries. So it's a 2-team just to deliver groceries. And this store is going to get 3 to 4 truckloads a day. So it's a lot of effort, it's a lot of manpower, and it's a logistical, really kind of a symphony to get it done.
Wait, let's just talk more about that, because when I think, okay, why do we pay a lot for groceries in New York City? Intuitively, that makes a lot of, just even the trucking component and the fact that it's, you go out to the suburbs and they don't have to have like a guy saying on the beep, is there a car there? Is a kid on a scooter or something like that there? Talk to us a little bit more figuring that component out and the two drivers and like how that sort of, the math of what that contributes or saves in terms of groceries.
Yeah, and with everything we do, and we're really focused on efficiency. You mentioned sushi bars and barbecue pits before.
Yeah.
So we don't have those.
Yeah, I know.
But when we're going to put a truck, we're going to 2 guys onto a truck, 2 drivers onto a truck, 3 to 4 times a day. That goes into the calculus. Of course, we look at the rent we're going to pay. It's more expensive in Manhattan, no doubt about it. But then we look at the sales. It's just a math equation. We make sure that, yes, there's going to be extra cost on delivery. There's going to be extra cost on properties. That's just a fact, but it goes into the equation.
So, okay, you've got trucks delivering the groceries overnight. You have a huge space. I should just emphasize, we saw it.
Yeah.
We ran through the aisles because we never got the chance to run through groceries. I'm going to speed it up 2 times,
to
Joe.
make it look like
It'll
we're
look
running
really
fast.
good. Yeah, that's right. You're expecting a lot of people in that location. How are you going to be restocking the shelves? Because it's a big space, but there are a lot of people in New York. I imagine things will literally be flying off the shelves to some degree. What does that restocking process look like in a crowded city?
Great question. And we have awesome employees at the store, first and foremost. Some unique things about how we restock our stores is all of our product comes in a display case. So again, we go back to those supply partners and we say, okay, how can we restock the organic greens? How can we restock the spinach? They put it into a display ready case. We
this
take
is
that
like
case.
A box
It's like
where
a tray.
you can see the items. Yeah,
It's a tray. So our staff can restock case after case after case and not have to stack it unit by unit by unit. So we're going to restock that produce 3 to 4 times a day, but we can do it really, really fast.
Stay tuned for more of our interview with Aldi U.S. Chief Commercial Officer Scott Patton. We are talking about opening up a low-price grocery store in the middle of Manhattan. To hear the full conversation, subscribe to Odd Lots wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Tracy Alloway.
And I'm Joe Weisenthal, and this is Odd Lots on Bloomberg Radio.
And I'm Monica Ricks in the Bloomberg newsroom. Here are some of the stories we're watching. President Trump has vowed to decimate Iran following open calls for his killing at the funeral of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei this week. Trump mentioned the threats at the NATO summit in Turkey.
It's a very dangerous profession. No, I'm number 1 on the kill list for Iran. They're lovely people. I'm number 1. So I don't know. I can't tell you that, but I don't really care because I'm doing my job and I'm doing it, I hope, better than anybody's ever done it.
On social media last night, Trump said 1,000 missiles are locked and loaded and aimed at Iran should its government act on threats to assassinate or attempt to assassinate him. Iran, however, has rejected Trump's contention this morning that peace talks could continue without a ceasefire. It wants Washington to agree to its terms on transit issues through the Strait of Hormuz and normalizing its oil exports. Cuba suffered another nationwide blackout as the country grapples with an aging power grid, chronic fuel shortages, and the threat of further U.S. sanctions. The island's energy ministry says authorities are working to recover service, but rolling outages have been happening there since January, raising doubts about whether electricity service can return to normal without more investments and a more stable fuel supply. At least 31 states are now reporting cases of intestinal infection cyclopsoriasis, which doctors say could last weeks and lead to some pretty painful symptoms.
Fortunately, this can be treated with an antibiotic if you do get symptoms and you go to a doctor and you get tested.
Dr. Alok Patel on ABC News. Health officials believe it may be linked to contaminated produce or water. A sweeping housing affordability bill became law at midnight despite President Trump's refusal to sign it unless Congress approved a strict voter ID bill. That doesn't have enough support to pass, but this housing bill is a bipartisan move to address the high cost of housing amid elevated mortgage rates and near record high home prices.
Any accusation of non-consensual behavior is categorically false.
Graham Plattner has formally dropped out of Maine's U.S. Senate race days after denying sexual assault allegations. Democrats now have till July 27th to find a replacement to go up against incumbent Republican Senator Susan Collins. Maine is considered a crucial state for control of the Senate in November, and Collins is considered vulnerable. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Monica Ricks, and this is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg Green returns to New York during Climate Week on September 22nd and 23rd, bringing together industry leaders, policymakers, and climate innovators to explore what's next in the transition to a more resilient and future-ready world. Powered by Bloomberg's editorial coverage and data-driven insights, we'll examine how climate intersects with the forces shaping our future, from technology and the economy to policy and community. Learn more at bloomberglive.com/green-ny-radio.
Bloomberg Radio, on demand and in your podcast feed.
On the latest edition of the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast, formerly with Fidelity and now Noble Capital, George Noble.
This is 120 times revenues. And, it's even if you look at the company's projection, they're already borrowing money. You look at the company's projection, they're going to be cash flow negative for years to come. And here's the worst part of SpaceX, which I don't want to engage in the Captain Obvious thinking, but the thing everyone should consider, and that is the staggered lockup the unlock that we're looking at.
Yeah.
Okay, starting from next month when the quarterly earnings come out, 20% of the shares come unlocked shortly thereafter, and then there's a whole series of unlocks, 7% every 20 or 30 days. By December, 100% of the shares will be freely floating. The important point that investors should understand is even without any change in the fundamentals, when you go from a 5% float to 100% float,
George, in the old days, when you would take a 2-hour lunch at Lockober's and you used to hold court there off the bar, but in the old days, when a company went public, it took its shares public and maybe they had a little stub they kept private. Now we're unloading 5% of the public. To me, it's manipulative. Should regulators step in and get the initial public offering market back to a normal segmentation?
100%. It's not a question of what's legal or illegal. It's just not right. Society is not well served by allowing this. Grandma's 401k is the exit liquidity for this manipulation. And I think the regulators are asleep at the wheel.
Hear the full conversation on the latest edition of the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Plus, listen anytime on the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com. Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Podcast Spotlight Hour on Bloomberg Radio.
This is Odd Lots on Bloomberg Radio. I'm Joe Weisenthal.
And I'm Tracy Alloway.
Today's episode is looking at why Aldi is opening up a store right off Times Square. We are speaking with Aldi U.S. Chief Commercial Officer, Scott Patton.
So more broadly, Aldi's is, I'm not sure famous is the right word, but one of the differentiators of the grocery store is that you have fewer SKUs, right? You just have fewer products there, or you're more mindful about the products that you're actually putting on the shelves. What have you learned from that process that surprised you at all versus, say, if I go into a Walmart and I've got 60 different types of ketchup staring me in the face, including the new dill-flavored pickle one.
Which does sound good.
Yeah, tempting.
We have 2,000 SKUs in the store, probably 4,000 varieties. Now, let's take the ketchup example. So we just talked about the typical store is going to have 30 to 40 varieties. And as you asked, we have 2. I would simply ask the customer, do you really need 40 choices for ketchups? Or is 2 good? We have organic, we have conventional. Is 2 enough? We have the right size. Do you need upside down squeeze, right side up squeeze, small glass, big glass? And what we did some, I'll call it a study, but I'll call it some interesting walks with customers through our competitors. And sometimes you would stand in front of, let's say, an olive oil selection. Ketchup is 30 to 40. Olive oil could be 50 or 60 different selections, depending on where you're shopping. And what we found was afterwards, the customers felt less confident in their purchase. So we have 4 different varieties of olive oil. 4 is a pretty good selection for our store. You're going to have organic, you're going to have Sicilian, you're going to have pure, and you're going to have extra virgin. Good selection. If you're a consumer faced with 60 different choices of olive oil, how do you know which one to buy? So they were less confident in their choice when they were trying to choose from 60. When you have 4, they felt pretty good about their selection. Unscientific for sure, but to watch the reaction on the customer's face when you walk them in front of it, they were really puzzled with which one do I buy?
This is probably an unfair question on all sides around. What do you think conventional wisdom is in the grocery store business. If I were talking to the chief commercial officer, whatever, Q-Food, what do you think the conventional wisdom is in grocery about why it's important to have 60 different olive oil SKUs?
It's about selection. The belief is that customers want these different options. And to be fair, customers do want some of those options, and it can come down to shelf space. Which suppliers are paying you to be on their shelf?
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes the more you pay, the more shelf space you get. So at all the, with our private label, we have 2 ketchups. There's no shelf space, there's no slotting fees, and that's a big difference. So yes, there can be selection, but we need to move those articles through the store very, very quickly.
Well, talk about this further. So again, like a hallmark of Aldi's is fewer SKUs. How does that actually feed into, I guess, more efficient processes for the grocery store and then lower prices for shoppers?
You mentioned the TV show earlier about the people, and I grew up in a grocery store. So I didn't grow up in it. So I worked there in high school, and I was paid probably $3.25 an hour to come in at night and turn the labels and stock everything forward. And me and 8 of my buddies would do that for about 6 hours. And you think about that cost. How expensive is that to do that in a grocery store? And I was in a small local grocery store. Think about a big competitor who's paying all those folks to do that. Now, our products come in, you're in the case, you only have 2,000 SKUs to put on the shelf. We're not having our folks come in and turn the labels and front everything at night. In fact, they sell out so quickly we don't need to. So that's just one example of all that cost that goes into turning those labels and pulling everything forward. We don't have that.
What does turning the labels mean? So let's walk through some math. Let's say, let's say a store sells 1,000 bottles of olive oil a day. I don't know what the number, but that's probably somewhere it sells 1,000 bottles. And let's say that store sells 500 brands of extra virgin and 500 brands of organic. And then, bottles. And then there's another store that sells 1,000 bottles of olive oil a day, but it's like 50 Sicilian, 50 organic, 50 extra virgin, 50 whatever. Walk us through the math of why 1,000 bottles with the 2 SKUs is going to be significantly more efficient and cheaper from a store perspective than 1,000 bottles with more SKUs.
So when the truck comes in at a traditional grocery store, let's say you have 50 different SKUs, you have to restock them all. That's 50 different cases you have to open. You have to find the 50 different cases. You have to match it up to the spot on the shelf, restock it, make sure you have the right one, get the labels all turned the right way, get the bottles all square. You don't want to drop any. So you have 50 different options. So one person is sitting there with a cart with 50 different cases trying to match them to the right spot on the shelf. Come to the Aldi store. We have 2. Olive oil, we have 4. You can very clearly see this one goes right here. So we can literally restock all of our olive oil in probably 2% of the time that it takes to stock another store. So just think about the math on trying to put that puzzle together of 50 different varieties compared to 4.
Your price labels are digital, right?
We are.
Most, if not all of your stores now?
All of our stores are digital.
All of the stores. Okay. How does that help with labor costs? And then also, I have to ask, there's been a lot of criticism of some of these digital labels because people think they're dynamic pricing and that as they reach for an avocado, the price is going to go up by $2 or whatever. How should we think about those?
Yeah, so let me handle that part first. We've heard those same criticisms or concerns out there. We do not do dynamic pricing. We would never do dynamic pricing. Actually, all of our stores have the same price. We change them usually once a week or so, depending on what's going on in the produce
even
market.
The New York store would have the same prices?
Same price in New York as out in Connecticut. And I know that's going to be
it's hard for me personally to believe.
We'll call it a pleasant surprise for those in Manhattan. When they walk in and they see, chicken breast for $2.19 a pound or eggs for $1.47. So it's going to be kind of amazing. But when we talk about the electronic shelf labels, we were spending between 3 and 4 hours per store per week to change out our signs. So when we switch to the digital version, we save all of that labor. So again, 2,600 stores times 4 hours a week. You can do the math on that. Think about all that savings. Again, that's how we get chicken breast down to $2.19. But the opportunity is there to abuse that system, but we will not do that.
So just to be clear, I mean, the reason you were changing out physical labels is because the prices were changing, but you're not changing them on a minute-to-minute kind of basis.
No, we would usually change them once a week. We have the Aldi Finds area where those come in. We have 100 new items every week. I don't know if we'll talk about that, but we'd have to put all those signs out, take the old signs down. That's a lot of labor to do those things, but we don't have to do that anymore.
This was something I did not know about prior to yesterday's field trip. So the Aldi Find section, I guess apparently your fans have dubbed that the Isle of Shame.
They have.
Right? So this is where some brilliant merchandise, like a true showman, a merchandiser has figured out something. So explain what this aisle is and why it's so iconic to so many. There's like a 4 million person Facebook group dedicated to this specific aisle. Where did this come from, this aisle, the so-called aisle of shame?
So it actually, to explain the concept, you walk into a grocery store, you're expecting to buy groceries, your soup, your sushi, all those types of things. And we have a whole aisle that's a lot of general merchandise. So we're going to have swimming pools. We're going to have
a lot of seasonal stuff.
Yeah, seasonal. Right now, 4th of July is coming up. FIFA World Cup's in town, so we have those articles as well. The origins of that actually goes back to our origins in Europe. So if you think about European, I know if you've been to Europe, they don't have a lot of the competitors that we have here, a lot of the big box stores.
Right.
So Aldi actually had a pretty big business and still has a significant business selling these types of general merchandise. It could be DIY, it could be paint, it could be power tools. So we took that concept when we came to the U.S., and it's been pretty successful. Now, how it's different in the U.S. is it's still very unique that you're going to have all of these articles right next to your groceries. So what we do is we bring in about 100 new items every week. And they're going to be, I'll call it random, but not so random. They're actually going to be the items you need when you need them. So we're not going to carry these articles all year long. We're not going to have an inflatable pool in February. If you look at the competition, they will have that sitting on the shelf. So we bring in the inflatable pool right when you need it. So back to your comment on the aisle of shame, which I will say, we do have a Facebook group started by our fans, and it's called the Aisle of Shame, or AOS. And this popped up, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. And we started looking at that as a business saying, what is going on here? What is happening in this aisle of shame? And as a retailer, you're always worried about your brand. You're concerned about your brand. And you see this growing Facebook group called the Aisle of Shame, and you have to ask yourself, what are we going to do about that? So it is 100% driven by our fans. And really what happens is our customers come in each week. They start posting back and forth. Oh, look what I got. I got the pool. I got the chainsaw. I got whatever it is. And they're having a lot of fun with these things. And this group has grown to over 4 million users on a regular basis. So origins of Aisle of Shame, pretty interesting. People were posting onto Facebook, hey, I went to Aldi. I got my ketchup. I got my barbecue sauce. I got my olive oil. And I also got these cute athletic shoes. And then they were like, I'm so ashamed. I didn't stay on budget. I'm so ashamed. So they were posting these shame photos from trunks of their cars, from their kitchens. We sell a tremendous amount of candles. People were posting their family rooms with 50, 60, 70 different candles of all the
shame.
I love a good scented candle. I fully admit my basicness when it comes to scented candles. But
So it was shame in a good way. So I think as a brand, we've said, okay, let's not fight this. It's great because people love it. So it's the Aisle of Shame. It's the Aldi finds. And we love that our fans want to post about it and talk about it. And we learn from this as well. So like I said, I run the buying department, and we have great buyers out there. They watch this all of the time.
You've been in this business for a long time. It feels like one of the things that's happened, I can't even say relatively recently, but in recent-ish years, is that social media has become such a bigger force when it comes to shopping. So you have Facebook groups like the one you just described, and you can watch those and maybe get a sense of what customers are liking. You also have social media trends. So every once in a while you have a food item or an Alison Roman recipe that goes viral, and suddenly everyone wants to buy new tomatoes or a particular type of cheese. How has that impacted the buying process for you?
Certainly, we have to pay attention to those trends. And you mentioned the feta cheese and tomato recipe from a few years ago. Our feta cheese sales went through the roof. So we had to work very quickly with our suppliers to get more feta. More recently, one is the sourdough trend. So sourdough baking at home, the sourdough trend. Now, sourdough is not easy. You got to feed your starter. I would love to do it. I don't have the patience for it. But that tells us and our buying team, hey, what's going on with sourdough? So now we've launched a couple of sourdough items a couple of years ago. It's actually the top performing item in the bread set now. So we are selling, over 500,000 loaves of sourdough every single week in our stores.
Wait, so when you suddenly see feta flying off the shelves, how long does it take you to actually figure out what's going on here and what's driving the additional demand? And then how long does it take for you to respond to it?
And that's one of the great things about being private label, because we're in control of our label. We're in control of our supply chain. We work directly with our producers. So if we were a brand, we'd have to call them and say, hey, can we get more of your brand that you're sending to every other retailer? We go directly to the manufacturer. We say, look, how can we get more line time? How can you dedicate more Aldi product? What can we do with packaging? It can be as quick as a couple of months. It can take a little bit longer depending on the item. But being a private label, we can just pick up the phone, call directly that supplier. Oftentimes it's the owner, the president of the company, and say, look, what can we do about feta? How can we expand your sourdough line? What can we do to help you? And then we partner with them.
More to come from our conversation on how to open a low-price grocery store in the middle of Manhattan. We are speaking with Aldi U.S. Chief Commercial Officer Scott Patton. I'm Tracy Alloway.
And I'm Joe Weisenthal, and this is Odd Lots on Bloomberg Radio.
To hear all of our episodes in full, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.
This is your 24-hour source for world markets and breaking business news. Bloomberg Radio. Coming up, the latest market-moving headlines from Bloomberg. First, an update from our partners at ABC News.
From ABC News, I'm Brian Clark. Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna of California says he's considering running for president in 2028, in part because of what he's experienced in the West Bank. He says he was detained by Israeli settlers on Thursday.
These hoodlums come in with machine guns, an M4, an American-made machine gun, and they detain us. They block off the road. And then they call the IDF, and the IDF is on their side, not on the side of the Americans.
The group was eventually allowed to pass. There's a vigil planned in Houston today for Lorenzo Salgado Araujo, who was shot and killed by ICE agents Thursday. Lawyers for his family say the government's version of events does not match witness accounts. The shooting is under investigation. He was not the target of the ICE investigation. The Justice Department says it's not targeting reporters, but is looking for people who leak classified information. It's after New York Times reporters were subpoenaed after they reported on security concerns around the new Air Force One. This is ABC News.
And I'm Monica Ricks in the Bloomberg Newsroom. Here's some of the stories we're watching. Apple is suing OpenAI for trade secret theft, accusing the artificial intelligence startup and its hardware chief of engaging in a coordinated campaign to steal information about upcoming products. Mark Gurman wrote the story for Bloomberg News.
Apple saying that OpenAI actively coached employees at Apple on how to leave Apple and how to join OpenAI without creating suspicion that they're taking confidential information with them. Obviously, the backdrop here is that Apple and OpenAI, before this lawsuit, were going to war over AI devices.
OpenAI says it has, quote, no interest in other companies' trade secrets, but Apple's demanding OpenAI cease its practices, destroy any proprietary material, and redesign upcoming products so they don't include any of its technology. Wall Street scored some gains to end the week, thanks in big part to a strong market debut of memory chip maker SK Hynix. Shares of the company closed up 15% after raising $26.5 billion with its American depository receipt offering. SK Hynix says it plans to use those funds to expand chip manufacturing and potentially bring some of that memory production here to the U.S. Meantime, the Trump administration plans to ease export restrictions on the United Arab Emirates, allowing it to buy advanced technologies, including semiconductors for AI. That rule change means the UAE no longer needs a U.S. license to purchase cutting-edge AI chips from companies like NVIDIA and Advanced Micro Devices. The Wall Street Journal reports MGM Resorts is now in deal talks with Barry Diller. Bloomberg's Ed Kalegi has details.
MGM Resorts has been negotiating a potential deal with Barry Diller's People Incorporated after the media mogul offered to buy the casino giant. MGM set up a special board committee and lined up advisors to help evaluate the proposal. MGM believes Diller's offer undervalues the company. Diller is being advised by bankers including some at JP Morgan Chase who are working to pull together financing for the deal. Diller, whose company already owns 26% of MGM, offered $48.30 a share for the rest of the company on June 1st, valuing the company at around $12.4 billion. MGM has yet to publicly respond to the offer. Ed Kalegi, Bloomberg Radio.
Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Monica Ricks, and this is Bloomberg.
Get the news you need to start your day in just 15 minutes.
Let's begin with the race to the midterms.
An escalation in tensions between the U.S. and Iran.
Wake up with Bloomberg Daybreak U.S. edition.
The Ebola virus continues to spread in Congo.
Upsets at the World Cup.
Available now on your podcast feed. Each weekday morning at 6 a.m. Eastern.
The biggest IPO of all time.
Subscribe to Bloomberg Daybreak U.S. edition on Apple, Spotify, and everywhere you get your podcasts. Bloomberg Radio. Context changes everything.
Want to understand what's really driving Australia's economy?
The RBA are still alert to inflation risk.
China-Australia relations have been deteriorating.
The ongoing discussion over the rising cost of everything.
Listen to the Bloomberg Australia podcast, winner of the 2026 Australian Audio Award for Best Money and Business Podcast. Each week, we bring you smart conversations with leaders in business and our journalists here and around the globe. Subscribe to the Bloomberg Australia podcast wherever you listen.
The Big Take, a daily podcast from Bloomberg and iHeartRadio, highlighting the best reporting by Bloomberg News from around the globe.
How is the American farmer doing?
Calls to tax the rich.
Does China tech even need U.S. money now?
Each weekday, we dig into one important story and tell you why it matters.
A new 20th anniversary iPhone.
Predicting where AI is going next.
Listen to The Big Take on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, the Bloomberg Business app, or wherever you listen.
Hi, I'm Barry Ritholtz, inviting you to join me for the Masters in Business podcast. Every week, we bring you conversations with the people who shape markets, investing, and business. I speak with CEOs, Nobel laureates, market innovators, and legendary investors. Whether you own stocks, bonds, real estate, commodities, even crypto, these are discussions you absolutely need to hear. Subscribe to the Masters in Business podcast on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere you listen.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. When it comes to jobs, it turns out AI might be doing the opposite of what everyone was afraid of.
Maybe the AI story is playing out a little bit differently.
Lisa Simon is chief economist at Revelio Labs, which just published a study finding
companies that are adopting AI really heavily are actually some of the fastest growing companies, and they are adding in particular entry-level jobs
at faster rates than at firms not heavily adopting AI. Simon tells Bloomberg it came as a surprise to see entry-level jobs getting a boost, but it does make sense.
You need people that know how to deal with that technology, and I do think that tends to be the digital natives that are a little bit younger.
But at the same time,
these models produce so much output that you also need people that are really experienced and know what they're doing. I think you're just seeing hiring across the board, both on the expert and on this entry level.
In short, even with inevitable areas of disruption, Simon says
AI adoption and employment growth can coexist.
Andrew O'Day, Bloomberg Radio.
Bloomberg Radio, on demand and in your podcast feed.
On the latest edition of the Bloomberg Intelligence podcast, a conversation with George Ferguson, our senior aerospace, defense, and airlines analyst, on earnings from Delta Airlines.
Delta, United, and to a lesser extent American are going to probably be the best part of the story this quarter. And I think Delta showed some resilience in the revenue lines, right? And I think, you have to remember this is a pretty diversified, from a revenue standpoint, company. They have maintenance business that brought in some great double-digit gains. They had cargo, they had loyalty that all sort of brought in gains, and basic lagged a little. But I think generally the story was pretty good on the revenue front. They grew less than United and American, so I think that means they could support some of those higher fares. They were like at 1% seat count growth. We're going to see United, I think, come in closer to 6%. We're going to see American around 3-ish. So I think this might be the best part, again, of the revenue story for U.S. airlines as we get into this earnings season. And one of the challenges, I think, too, in growing a little slower on the capacity front is that some of their costs ballooned a little bit. But look, again, I think they made some good ground. They haven't totally compensated for higher fuel prices.
How is a cabin changing within the industry these days?
They're focusing on the well-heeled consumer. You're a retiree, and again, I think, Delta has shown some success on that front. And I would expect you're going to see the same out of United and American, but to a lesser extent.
Hear the full conversation on the latest edition of the Bloomberg Intelligence Podcast. Subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Plus, listen anytime on the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Podcast Spotlight Hour on Bloomberg Radio.
You're listening to the Odd Lots podcast on Bloomberg Radio. I'm Joe Weisenthal.
And I'm Tracy Alloway.
On today's show, we are discussing what it takes to meaningfully reduce the cost of groceries in a given grocery store location. We are speaking with Aldi U.S. Chief Commercial Officer Scott Patton. I had never gone into an Aldi before, and I'm not sure I would have noticed it had you not pointed it out. But then once you pointed it out, it was quite obvious. So, for example, like on a bag of chips, you have really big barcodes, and either in some boxes, then you notice had a barcode on every surface. And some had really big barcodes, and it's like, okay, I get that. That's intuitive. It makes the swiping faster. Give us a little history of barcode innovation, and how do you actually sort of measure the optimal, I guess, ratio of adding barcodes and figuring out how much that could contribute to faster throughput versus adding barcodes, and then, like, you can't even see what the product is. So finding that sort of efficient frontier of barcode allocation on a package.
And I think before we talk about barcodes and scanning, we actually have to go all the way back to before we had scanners.
Okay.
So we were actually the last retailer to roll out scanning in stores. So I started with a company in 1995. I showed up on day one, and my training district manager said, I hope you've memorized all the prices by now.
Oh my God.
And I had this look on my face, and I said, no one told me about that.
Memorized all the prices.
Memorized all the prices. So up until 1998, all of our employees memorized all of the prices.
Jeez.
And they would enter them by hand on an old-fashioned 10 key. And so the price memorization was critical to our efficiency. We talk about efficiency and throughput. Now, you could say, why didn't we do scanning back then? Our cashiers were too fast. We couldn't find a scanning system that was fast enough to keep up with our 10 key. So we did two things. One, we started working with scanning manufacturers. And the bi-level scanner, which you may or may not be familiar with, if you think back long time ago, there was one scanner. It was level.
Yeah.
And cashiers come. So bi-level scanners were essentially created out of our input saying, look, we need to do this faster.
Bi-level, so that means there's the horizontal surface and then the vertical thing, and they both have a chance at picking up the barcode.
Exactly.
Is that how? Okay.
Exactly. So that was one of the innovations that we were pioneering with our suppliers to say, look, how can we move our memorizing prices wasn't the long-term fit for sure. It's very difficult, by the way. But when you have these bi-level scanners, it's okay, there's a chance here. And the second part was on packaging. So I think we've all been in a grocery store and you've seen the cashier struggling to kind of turn the item and
or
twist
we've
their
been
wrist.
at self-checkout and been struggling ourselves.
Yeah, so we came up with the idea and we're just going to add multiple barcodes. So we measure everything we scan, right? So all of our associates, they're measured on items per minute, and we can track the items per minute. So if we're going to do a scanner update, does it pick up scanning faster? We track those items per minute. If we do packaging innovations, and we'll get feedback from our store staff to say, look, this item's not scanning well. So to your example, you didn't notice it in the store, and actually most of our customers don't because we hide it so well. So you can take an article, any item in the store, you will find 4, 5, or 6 barcodes, and until we point it out to a customer, they don't even know it exists. So hopefully people go check their pantry and go, oh my gosh, I never noticed it.
Well, it is funny though. On the chips example, it almost looks like it's part of the bag design because it's like a stripe that basically goes around the whole thing. But wait, now I'm thinking back in the age of when cashiers were memorizing grocery prices, do you think that had an impact on the monetary policy transmission mechanism? Do you think price increases didn't filter down into
because it would have just been too burdensome on the company to make their employees like do another memorization?
Someone needs to do a paper.
Yeah, we should.
Okay, obvious question though. The barcode thing kind of blew my mind because, as you said, I never noticed it before. How come other grocery stores or other brands don't do something similar?
Because we're private label, these are our products, and we use that real estate. We design the labels. We design the brands. We control the ingredients. We design the labels. So for us, we're based on efficiency. I would say some of our competitors aren't as focused on that. It does take up real estate on the package. There's no doubt about it. But the fact that nobody notices it is pretty interesting as well. So for us, it's strictly productivity. And since we control the product and the packaging, we can put 20 barcodes if we wanted to.
But if I'm like a Haagen-Dazs or something and I'm designing my box of ice cream sandwiches or whatever it is, I would be reluctant to give up some of that additional space to barcodes, you think?
I think so. I mean, if you're a brand, you want to talk about the products and you want to have the romance copy and you want to tell the history of the product. I think they're more focused on that than the retailer's productivity. We're focused on the productivity so we can get the savings for the customer. But you're absolutely right. Adding romance copy and all those great words on the back of the
is that what you call it?
Term of art?
It's called romance copy.
I have often felt feelings of romance as I read the back of ice cream packages.
Do you ever like those things? It'll be like Bob and Joe's corn chips, and it's like the story would be like Bob was working at Goldman Sachs and realized, why am I devoting my life to M&A when I could be devoting it to like design bake? I'm not a fan. I always think I do not need romance copy.
You need to know the origin story of your potato chips, Joe.
You need more barcodes.
Yeah. Talk to us about what you see in this current state of the art of self-checkout. And the reason there's a couple of things I ask, because, for example, Uniqlo, which is where I buy a lot of my clothes, I love their self-checkout. But there's clothes, there's not grocery. But you dump all of the clothes into a bucket, it spits out a price, probably like RFD or whatever, it's done. It's that. And then, so my local Key Foods, you're like doing the thing where you're twisting. Half the time, like someone has to come by and like swipe something. Maybe something will need an age verification. It doesn't really quite seem to work yet. And so I'm curious what you're seeing at Aldi in terms of where we are with self-checkout technology. I think it kind of drives people crazy.
Yeah, I think it's a mixed bag. I mean, some people love it, some people don't love it. And for all the reasons that you said, RFID hasn't come to grocery yet. RFID is a pretty expensive technology when you're talking about selling avocados and tomatoes. So RFID hasn't quite made it there yet. Even the best self-checkout, you're going to have an age verification for alcohol purchases. You're going to struggle sometimes to weigh the produce. So we have it in about a third of our stores. I think some customers love it, but in our stores that have self-checkout, we always have an employee checkout as well. And that's the option to the consumer. I think we're still learning. Retailers are figuring out what works best for them. Do you want a corral? Do you want an attendant? What's the best layout?
What's corral?
So you might want to move people through more of a line, or do you want more of a separated area? So the layout of the self-checkout can have a pretty big impact on the effectiveness. How many people are monitoring it? And by the time you pay someone to stand there and monitor it, could you have just scanned their groceries for them?
Yeah.
Those are the questions that I think all the retailers are facing right now.
How many different types of green grapes are there? We talked about this yesterday, and I just let you go back to that. You go to the farmers, you pick a grape. Like, how many different options are you looking at, et cetera? Novelty, and we talked about this again with tomatoes. They always seem to be coming out with new tomatoes. Where are we at with the grape market? Yeah,
so the grape market is fascinating because for the average consumer, which we are all average consumers, right? You have green grapes and you have red grapes. You go to the store, you want green, you like red, and you ask a customer, I like the green ones, I like the red ones. But when you get into the details, like I said, we have an awesome produce buying team. There's over 100 varieties of green grapes. So when you go to the Aldi store or the competitor next door, likely you're going to have 2 different varieties. Now, each of those varieties has a different flavor profile, different yield. The higher the yield, sometimes the less the flavor. So there's trade-offs on all those types of things. So what we do, we work with the growers. We mentioned this earlier. We figure, what's the best flavor profile? We don't want the customer to have to think about it. We want them to come to our store, come to Aldi and say, I love the Aldi green grapes, or I love the blackberries. I love the blackberries, and they don't know the details behind it.
Those blackberries were huge.
They were big,
the ones
and
we
they
sampled
didn't have
yesterday.
that sort of tart that sometimes
the sourness,
make you pucker.
Yeah,
that's another example of picking the variety. So if we were just buying off the market, you're just going down to the local produce market and saying, give me whatever blackberries you have, you're going to get what they have available. Working with the grower, you can narrow that 100 varieties of green grapes down to the 1 or 2 you want to have in your stores. What's in season, what's going to have the right flavor profile. We don't want it too sour. You don't want it too sweet. You want to have good shelf life. Produce waste, all those types of things go into the decisions of our produce team. It's actually pretty sophisticated, and it's fine that customers take it for granted. We just want them to come in and say, these green grapes are great, but we've done all the work to figure that out with the farmers.
I want to ask at least one, what Aldi can tell us about the macro environment right now type question. So one of the stories that we've been talking about on the show, and lots of other people have as well, is high produce prices, higher beef prices, certainly, general inflationary pressures on the consumer. And I'm very curious if you've seen that in the spend at your own stores, if you've maybe seen smaller basket sizes, or maybe you've seen people trading down from beef to chicken, that sort of thing. What are you seeing in terms of inflationary pressures on your shoppers?
Yeah, so shoppers are, I think, they've been under pressure for several years now. And for all the reasons we talked about before, whether it's the case design or the UPCs or going straight to the farmer, we try to keep all those cost pressures down, but we're not immune. We're not immune to commodity markets. You mentioned beef, for instance. Beef prices are at 70-year highs. So we still see our customers buying beef. However, I'll give you an example. Ground beef right now is relatively expensive by historical context. You can talk $5.99 or $6.99 a pound, even at the Aldi store for ground beef. What we've seen is some consumers opting for ground turkey or ground chicken. A nice substitute, a good quality product, still fresh, probably 30% cheaper or 40% less expensive. And that's a good option. Customers are still going to buy their protein. Protein is all the craze right now.
Yeah.
But we have seen some switching between maybe a higher protein, expensive protein like beef, and a lower cost like chicken.
I'd say a lot's changed in the last 10 years on all kinds of levels. We could talk about the role of social media. We could talk about, obviously, COVID and the inflation, or just COVID and how that made sourdough bread a thing, the hobby. But GLP-1's clearly part of the story, I think, with the protein boom. What are some sort of like clear data points that you see where you say, okay, like the GLP-1s are changing consumer buying behavior, other than just say, yes, they want more protein?
Yeah, so GLP-1s, we worked with some of our partners probably 18 months ago. And I think it was roughly 5% of the population at that time was on GLP-1s. We'd have to check that. But they also said when this goes to pill form, which is happening right now, we're going to see that adoption rate go up. So as GLP-1s are coming into pill form, of course, we're seeing more protein sales. What's interesting is if you talk to the meat team and the meat growers out there, they would say we're the original protein. And of course, we're selling more of that. But what we're seeing is protein really go throughout the store. Protein bagels.
Oh, yeah.
You're talking about protein popcorn, which there's going to be a point when it comes too far. We're rolling out a protein sparkling water. So our data points would say it's actually quite tasty. When you take a protein sparkling water, anything with protein right now is accelerating. I think there'll be a pullback at some point.
Yeah, the pendulum needs to swing to fiber. Americans need more fiber, not more protein.
Yeah, fiber is coming on as well. Okay, you can have fiber. Bean sales are actually up significantly.
Really?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, we're selling significantly more beans.
Wait, is that a GLP-1 thing as well?
It's a fiber. It's a fiber protein combo. Yeah, so we have a Greek chickpea that we've just rolled out, which is actually amazing. And I would say 2 years ago, we wouldn't have carried a Greek chickpea. But now we've rolled out a Greek chickpea, high in fiber. Customers are responding to it. We're rolling out a fiber water, but you're right. More protein, more fiber. And for us, it's making sure we have the products the customers want and being on trend. But bean sales, 5 years ago, bean sales weren't surging. But we're seeing a resurgence in some of these categories that maybe weren't thriving in the past, but now they're starting to come back to life.
That might also be inflationary pressure, because one of the greatest value meals, most filling meals you can ever make is red beans and rice, as I like to say. This has been Odd Thoughts on Bloomberg Radio. I'm Tracy Alloway.
And I'm Joe Weisenthal.
To hear the rest of this episode and all of our other interviews, be sure to subscribe to Odd Thoughts wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.
Broadcasting 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. Powered by more than 3,000 journalists and analysts in over 100 bureaus around the world. This is Bloomberg Radio. Now, an update from our partners at ABC News.
From ABC News, I'm Chuck Sievertson. Who's thinking about running for president?
I'm strongly considering it, and I'm more resolved to consider it after this trip. We need a new moral direction in our party.
The trip was to a village in the West Bank in the Mideast Thursday, says Congressman Ro Khanna, California Democrat. He says he was detained by Israeli settlers.
I saw the arrogance in the eyes of those settlers, 21 and 22-year-olds with guns, laughing that they had detained us. The arrogance of those young IDF soldiers that my tax dollars are funding, having no respect for the fact that they were detaining Americans.
Israeli military said troops and police officers intervened after reports of some trouble, according to Reuters news service. Going on now, a memorial service for the Mexican citizen fatally shot by immigration officers in Houston this week. ICE claims he rammed a vehicle holding officers during an attempted arrest and was allegedly shot in self-defense, but a lawyer for two witnesses now disputing the official account. Not over these outbreaks.
An American humanitarian worker has been infected with Ebola in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. It comes just weeks after another American, a doctor, was infected and later flown to Germany for treatment alongside his exposed family members. The Ebola outbreak has led to over 600 deaths and has become the third largest on record. Health officials say they're having difficulty keeping up with just how fast the virus is spreading. Yuri Benajad, ABC News, New York.
Trading threats today as talks are going on in Oman. President Trump and Iranian leaders, the interim deal to end the war, buckled under crossfire in the Middle East. There's been open calls by people in Iran for the U.S. president's assassination. Bipartisan housing bill has become law today without President Trump's signature or veto. You're listening to ABC News.
Now, Bloomberg Radio weather on Sirius XM 121.
Showers and thunderstorms will be causing some afternoon travel problems for folks headed to and from the St. Louis area. Temperatures in St. Louis around 90. We'll have problems for folks heading in and out of Nashville this afternoon. Highs are going to be near 84. Houston, look for delays due to scattered showers and thunderstorms this afternoon. In Houston, temperatures will be near 91. You may also have some problems getting in and out of the Pensacola area this afternoon due to showers and thunderstorms. Highs are going to be near 90. We'll have showers and thunderstorms delaying travelers to and from Charlotte this afternoon. It'll be near 92. If you're headed to or from Columbus, Ohio, there'll be delays due to showers and thunderstorms, 89. Later this afternoon, showers and thunderstorms will start delaying travelers heading in and out of the Baltimore and Washington area. Temperatures in Baltimore and Washington should be around 88. I'm Rob Carolyn, and that's your Bloomberg Travelers Forecast. Now back to the latest headlines from ABC News.
The Trump administration has subpoenaed several New York Times journalists after their report on security concerns involving the new Air Force One. According to the paper, the new jet, which President Trump received as a gift from Qatar, entered service last week. The subpoenas seek to force the reporters to testify before a federal grand jury in Manhattan on Wednesday, the paper said. Russian attacks on Ukraine killed 6 people, including a child, wounded 29, officials say, adding that Ukrainian forces damaged more than 24 Russian tankers and other ships. A machine used to help polio patients breathe was once common but became less familiar after the wild form of the virus was eliminated in the U.S. The last American person using an iron lung died last month.
Martha Lillard was 5 years old when she was diagnosed with polio. It was expected to significantly shorten her life, as it did for other children and adults affected before the polio vaccine. But Martha Lillard lived a full life. She died June 26th at 78, even though she had depended on an iron lung. Her sister told the Associated Press their family was able to take road trips in a modified trailer. Martha Lillard even married a man earlier this year she had met in a chat room over 20 years ago. Lillard's sister says the effects of COVID-19 likely caused the death. Brian Clark, ABC News.
Crews are draining the Lincoln Memorial's reflecting pool again as President Trump's problem-plagued effort to renovate the site pushes past his initial July 4th deadline. Chuck Sievertson, ABC News.
And I'm Monica Ricks in the Bloomberg newsroom. Here are some of the stories we're watching. Apple is suing OpenAI for trade secret theft, accusing the company of a coordinated campaign to steal information, including drawings, components, and other materials about upcoming products. Mark Gurman's covering this story for Bloomberg and says OpenAI has lured away more than 400 former Apple workers.
The people running the hardware division over at OpenAI are 3 of the most senior people in Apple's design history, that being Johnny Ive, the head of design, that being Ting Tan, Apple's former VP of design in charge of the iPhone and the Apple Watch, and now he's the chief hardware officer.
Apple's seeking a jury trial in this case and also wants OpenAI to redesign upcoming products so they don't include any of its technology. In a statement, OpenAI says it has no interest in other companies' trade secrets. Wall Street notched a second week of gains. Here's Bloomberg's Charlie Pellet.
Traders drove stocks higher in the countdown to the earnings season kicking off next week, with SK Hynix jumping 13% in its debut. Oil declined as investors sifted through the latest geopolitical developments. Next week will bring us earnings from 6 of the biggest American banks. For the week, the Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 0.5%. NASDAQ Composite Index up for a second week, gaining 1.7%. Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Radio.
Delta Airlines reaffirmed its full-year profit guidance, citing strong demand for premium, corporate, and international travel. The airline's revenue rose 14% from a year earlier, but its adjusted fuel expense was up 77% from a year ago due to the war in Iran. CEO Ed Bastian jumped on an analyst call this week and talked about rising costs, not just for fuel.
But the cost for labor is up, the cost for airports are up, the cost for technology is up, planes you can't get. And if you can get them, their costs are higher.
He says all of that means ticket prices will likely remain higher. And MGM Resorts International is now said to be engaged in deal talks with Barry Diller's People's Inc. after Diller offered to acquire the part of the casino company he doesn't already own. The Wall Street Journal reports a proposal was made June 1st to buy the remaining 26% of the company, which would value MGM Resorts at about $12.4 billion. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Monica Ricks, and this is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg This Weekend. News, politics, and the lighter side of Bloomberg.
The great wealth transfer includes $570 billion in classic cars.
I'm not in a position to be inheriting any classic cars. You?
No, but my brother did inherit my non-classic car when I moved to New York, so he still has not paid me for it. Coming for you, Joey.
Bloomberg This Weekend. Saturdays and Sundays starting at 7 a.m. Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app.
This is Bloomberg Business Week Daily, reporting from the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead, with insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week Daily with Carol Masser and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the weekend edition of Bloomberg Business Week. Tim is off this week. Now, it was a volatile week for global markets. That included an escalation of tensions again between the United States and Iran that sent oil prices higher and their peace deal once again in doubt. We also had a focus on global relations, including the ongoing war between Ukraine and Russia, thanks to the NATO summit in Turkey. And then we also had investors parsing the latest Fed minutes for clues on the direction of U.S. interest rates. All of this as the tech trade churns as some strategists talk up a rotation out of high-flying chip stocks to the more subdued hyperscalers, which have way underperformed the overall market. This is all against a backdrop of investors increasingly questioning the momentum against the massive and pricey cost of that AI build-out. All right, it was a lot again. With that in mind, this week, the ever-changing AI narrative. Plus, navigating the high-stakes world of advanced manufacturing and industrial supply chain with Lippy Sternheim, CEO of Realloy, and the rush to decouple critical defense supply chains from China from the U.S. defense industrial base. He covered it all. Also, a sobering look at the accelerating human and economic costs of climate change and why extreme heat isn't the only impact shocking scientists, courtesy of our Bloomberg Green team. All of that to come. We begin with the AI build and the evolving conversations around the activity and its return on investment, especially as Wall Street focuses on the big tech hyperscalers. On that, we caught up with longtime investor Rudina Cesari. She's founder and managing partner at Glasswing Ventures. She invests in companies where artificial intelligence is the core architectural foundation. She joined me alongside Bloomberg Tech host Ed Ludlow and Bloomberg News credit reporter Emily Grafeo, who was in for Tim this week. We want to get into, though, what we feel like is the evolving AI story. Ed is here with us in studio, and then we want to bring in longtime investor Rudina Cesari. She's founder and managing partner at Glasswing Ventures. She invests in companies where AI is the core architectural foundation, and so she's been thinking about the next generation of winners. She joins us from Boston. Hey, great to have you here, Rudina, with Emily and, of course, with Ed. I'm curious about how this conversation around AI continues to evolve. We are now talking so much about the memory names. How do you see it?
Well, hello, Carolyn. Good to see everyone. I think fundamentally we are seeing the overall demand for AI-related infrastructure and all the way up to the application layer continue to be strong. And in my view, the shifts that we are seeing in the market sort of reflect the scarcity or overestimation of scarcity along the value chain. So on the point around NVIDIA and others, are we seeing the correction because we expected more scarcity? Well, on the hyperscalers, are the valuations coming back because it's becoming a lot easier to track the sources of revenue that these players will have? And by the way, we think of the hyperscalers as that sort of fundamental layer at the software infrastructure layer, but each of them are much more vertically integrated with their own chips. So in many ways, we're seeing the market move toward vertically integrated players from the chip layer all the way to the foundation models rather than just the CapEx spend. I don't know that we're out of the, CapEx demand. I think there's a multi-cycle, multi-year level of demand. I do think that perhaps we're correcting a bit for the overestimation of scarcity.
You mentioned revenue, and I'm curious, Rudina, if you can talk a little bit more about just how critical it is for investors like you to be able to pinpoint whether the spending on AI is actually translating into tangible revenue and whether we've seen that yet.
Thank you, Emily. I think it's interesting because I'm a very early stage investor. So I often say I back to brilliant researchers out of a lab and we build out a monetization plan. If anything, I would bifurcate between the next gen application layer AI companies, where not only are we seeing revenue, but the scale from zero to multi-million, hundreds of millions is a matter of months, rather than a matter of years. So if anything, we are seeing acceleration. Now, beneath that, two fundamental questions. Why? Is it because, especially on the enterprise side and even consumers, we are all experimenting and trying a lot of things? Thus, is the revenue sustainable or is it a leaky bucket? Second question, though, is really pertaining to the adoption of AI more systematically. So having moved beyond the, I'm going to experiment with this in-house build tool or with the, chat function of Claude or ChatGPT to something more serious. In that case, we're seeing demand for AI products to become much more of a important component, not just to the tech stack of enterprises, but to their actually business models and go-to-markets.
Radina, what's interesting about what you and the team at Glasswing are looking at, it's so timely for today with this Morgan Stanley hyperscaler story. So you are looking at AI native SaaS, various layers of the software stack. Every time I speak to one of the CEOs at the hyperscalers, I always ask them, you seem to be pitching and working on the same kinds of technologies that your customers already do. So how do you respond to that? The idea that the hyperscalers, the cloud computing companies, let's call them what they actually are going to want to offer the same tools that you might back at that early stage.
So thank you, Ed. The underlying question is, where is the moat for the startups relative to the incumbents? And I think the moat depends. Some of it has to do with, vertical plays. I recently backed a company called Modern Industrials. They are developing an end-to-end demand planning for distributors of lumber and building materials. Very, very specific, tens of billions type of opportunity a year in terms of the revenue they can generate. But if Microsoft or Anthropic or OpenAI are going to that level of specificity, we have something to worry about. By the same token, who will be their customers? So they have to draw a line, to your very astute question, around where am I going to stop competing with my customers? And, oh, by the way, is there value in being highly, highly specialized? My view is that there is, and the value doesn't necessarily lie in the models. It actually lies in the highly specific, albeit not as broad data sets, which then, deliver much, superior outputs.
I would say if I'm a pharmaceutical maker or like in the medical field, right? And I would say that I want a data set that I'm going to play with and that's very related to my field. I don't need to know about the rest of the stuff that some of the large language models are doing.
Yeah, or they
100%.
Or Radina, something you said a moment ago is really interesting. You are backing not companies necessarily. We'll work out the business plan later. You're backing the researchers out of the lab, and that applies at the late stage as well, right? The founder-led thesis. But those people also have specialisms, right? Does it matter to you if they have a core team of not just computer scientists, but in biology, biochemistry, etc.?
So let me parse what I intended with what I shared. In the case of a Modern Industrial, I'm very much going in with a very clear understanding of how it's monetized, what's the ROI for the customer. So in many ways, that's extremely tangible and very clear around the TAM, pricing, competitive dynamics. My earlier comment related more to what I would call frontier tech. So we have already achieved what we have achieved with the large language models. What comes next? We backed a company called Recursive AI. It's about the models correcting themselves to get around the next set of issues like hallucination and other problems that the large language models have. There is a whole paradigm of neo labs and new researchers that are bypassing in many ways the capabilities of the current incumbents. Think about Liquid AI, multi-billion-dollar company. They're actually doing all the processing at the edge. It's actually a whole different sort of way to bypass the need that we currently have on compute. So in those cases, you solve one of the compute problems or the energy problem or the the performance of the models, and then you worry about monetization. So it's not pie in the sky, I'll beg the smart people, and someday they will deliver something. It has a purpose, but you might not know the pricing. Kind of like how many of us would have guessed that pure consumption pricing was going to be the model. Does that make sense?
What one contemporary difference, though, is that group of 3 or 4 people can raise $1 billion out of the gate or several $100 million seed round at crazy valuation based on the value of their own intellectual capital. How does Glasswing even participate in early stage valuations like that?
Very good question. So our core product is actually, the more typical pre-seed seed stage rounds. We have a pool of capital and a product called access checks where we write, small $1 to $2 million access checks in these gigantic rounds to have a seat at the table, to have a seat to the ecosystem, to support the founders and participate with those that actually make it big. So while our core checks are focused on building the companies from the ground up, in the more typical fashion that you think of early stage venture, we absolutely get access to the big guys, and it's important. There are benefits for both.
Hey, speaking of the big guys, I just got time for maybe 1 or 2 more. XAI, what's your thought about that company, which seems to be, to some extent, coming from behind, but it's got certainly deep, deep pockets?
It's emerging more and more. I think, in many ways, I think of Elon's companies as all being intertwined with one holding, and the holding being Elon himself. I think it will be interesting to see what he does with XAI vis-a-vis SpaceX, and maybe even what happens with Tesla eventually. They are catching up. I think performance has improved, and to be perfectly honest, in the circles that sort of are leveraging the most cutting edge models, XAI is starting to become a real contender. Definitely coming from behind, though.
Are people are talking more about XAI?
Yeah,
a lot more than before.
Increasingly because of Cursor, right? Like the Cursor acquisition moving so quickly, people pay close attention because it's such a widely used tool.
All right.
Yet, even with Cursor now, the next generation saying we've bypassed Cursor. So things are moving so very fast. I go back to what becomes sustainable versus what is the flavor du jour. We shall see.
That was Radina Cesari, founder and managing partner of Glasswing Ventures. Our thanks as well to Ed Ludlow, host of Bloomberg Tech. Emily joins us a little bit later on this hour. Coming up, the high-stakes push to secure America's critical defense supply chains from foreign adversaries. We do that next with the CEO of the U.S.-based mine-to-magnet rare earth company, Realloys. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. This is Bloomberg.
I learned patience from my adoptive dad. All he had to say was,
"Hey, you got this. Just breathe." Hey, we're pretty good.
Yeah.
Might have to start a band.
I got it.
Learn about adopting a teen from foster care. You can't imagine the reward. Visit adoptuskids.org to find out more. This message is brought to you by Adopt US Kids, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and the Ad Council.
And I'm Monica Ricks in the Bloomberg newsroom. Here are some of the stories we're watching. President Trump says the U.S. will continue talks with Iran, but considers the ceasefire between both countries to be over. Bloomberg's Dan Williams has more from Israel.
I think this is largely about Hormuz, and I think it's largely about Trump being very personally upset, miffed at the open displays of defiance and hostility toward him that we saw in that week-long funeral for the slain supreme leader of Iran, huge banners in English threatening bluntly the killing of the U.S. president.
Trump says 1,000 missiles are locked and loaded if Iran follows through. The U.S. is also demanding Iran issue a public statement declaring the Strait of Hormuz open to all shipping without threats amid an ongoing fuel supply crunch. Russia and Ukraine attacked each other's key grain export gateways overnight after shipping across the Sea of Azov was disrupted the previous day. That triggered a spike in wheat prices. The New York Times has denounced the Justice Department for seeking to compel several reporters to testify next week after they reported on security concerns involving President Trump's new Qatari-donated Air Force One. The Times says some of those subpoenas were delivered by federal agents who showed up at reporters' homes, calling it a brazen act to intimidate journalists from doing their jobs. The White House hasn't commented, and an FBI official declined to explain the security issue. They also asked the Times to disclose their sources, which the paper refused to do. Democrats are now scrambling to find a replacement for Graham Plattner, who's officially withdrawn from Maine's U.S. Senate race following rape allegations. The deadline is July 27th. And there are no longer any active members on the U.S. Election Assistance Commission. Bloomberg's Amy Morris tells us President Trump has effectively relieved all 3 serving commissioners.
The commission is supposed to have 4 members. 1 seat was already vacant. President Trump fired the 2 Democratic members. The remaining Republican member was allowed to resign. The commission's bipartisan mission is to help election officials improve the administration of elections and help Americans participate in the voting process. But with the midterms around the corner, the agency now can't take any action until the president nominates new members and the Senate confirms them. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Monica Ricks, and this is Bloomberg.
A new chapter in global growth is being written, and much of it is happening in Africa.
Africans need to invest. There are deals to be done and business to be won.
I'm Jennifer Zabasaja. Every week on the Next Africa podcast, we track capital flows and political shifts shaping the continent's future.
The digitalization of Africa is going to power its growth.
Ridding the world of something like HIV is possible.
Population growth is so enormous in Africa.
Listen to Next Africa on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Bloomberg Radio, on demand and in your podcast feed.
On the latest edition of the Bloomberg Daybreak podcast, a conversation on the status of the Iran ceasefire with Bloomberg's Patrick Sykes.
These technical talks continue. I think most likely the substantive part of those will be focused on the Strait of Hormuz, obviously, where over the past few days we've seen these repeated clashes despite ostensibly the status of the ceasefire remaining in effect. Of course, we did have that comment from Trump the other day saying that to him it was dead, but quickly followed with the caveat that those talks would continue. So a strange kind of liminal phase. For now, it does seem that the active hostilities have eased again, and with that, some trickles through the strait, the waterway, but the still lots of hurdles ahead of the diplomacy.
So we are seeing a little bit of movement then through the Strait of Hormuz. We are seeing NYMEX crude oil down a bit this morning. So is there some hope that traffic is moving again, or will at least in the near term?
Exactly. In the near term, short of another flaring up of those tensions and more strikes, I think we're likely to see some owners, crews with a higher risk appetite be willing to take the risks. They've also got to decide, do they take the northern route along the Iranian coast in cooperation with the Iranian authorities, or do they defy that order from the Iranians and try to take the southern route and go dark and avoid detection? So 2 quite different ways to go about it. In general, the hostilities are going to cut the willingness to do that.
Hear the full conversation on the latest edition of the Bloomberg Daybreak U.S. Edition podcast. Subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Plus, listen anytime on the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
This is Bloomberg Business Week Daily with Carol Nasser and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
Hey, you might recall last month, we talked about this, I believe, the G7 meeting of global leaders. The group agreed that no single country should supply more than 60% of their imports of rare earths by 2030. It's all an effort, Tim, to reduce the reliance on China.
Yeah, the G7 leaders will aim for further reduction in their dependencies with a view to limiting exposure to 50% as soon as possible beyond 2030. Meantime, U.S. Pentagon allowing critical minerals plants to build on U.S. Army bases, leasing land to companies that will build and operate critical mineral processing plants. I think a lot of people are wondering how long that takes and sort of like what the timeline is for that.
And what's the structure between the government and really public-private sector?
But it's a way to get around the environmental review.
That's a good point. Yeah. All right. So there's a lot going on in this space. We've got a great voice on this. Lippy Sternheim is president and CEO of the U.S.-based mine-to-magnet rare earth company, Realloys. It's about a $923 million market cap company. Stock's up about 86% year-to-date, rallying nearly 6% in the past 2 days. Still down more than 20%, though, since late June. Stock was added to the Russell 3000, Tim, just on Monday.
Well, the company also appointing a new CEO last week. Lippy joins us from Boca Raton, Florida. Lippy, good to have you on the program. You last joined us back in mid-May. How has your world changed since then?
So far, so good. Thanks for having me on again. Last week, as you know, we announced that we partnered with the Army, which is very exciting. We raised $100 million in equity, also exciting. You mentioned a new CEO, but it's actually a CFO. Craig Cunningham just joined us with a very good background in this business, and he joins us now. And as we shuffle around and get ready for the next push in what we're doing in the rare earths. You mentioned the Army, and you asked a question about how long. I mentioned to you guys last time, it's not an overnight, business to get 40 years of Chinese dependency off the table, but we're working really hard to make the 2027 January 1st deforest deadline and help revitalize the government organic industrial base by partnering with them and building our facilities on Army bases.
Are there certain Army bases that you've already identified where you will be building your facilities?
So right now we're talking about Tool, Utah, which is us and another company. I believe they're in the boron business that the Army is putting in that Army base. But there's a few Army bases, and it's continuous talks of which is the best locations. For the manpower, the power, one of the big issues, as you mentioned, is environmental when it comes to these things. So wherever it's most best and most convenient to do so, the Army is looking for a big push to get this to the finish line and to make America in its strategic rare earths and its stockpiles and all of that in-house and on the shore.
How does all this work? The funding, the ownership rights, the time to build, like who's in charge if you're building an Army bases?
So obviously it's a lease with the Army. It's public-private partnership, which this is new to have it on the Army bases, but it tells you about how strategically important it is for the government and the Army, the military to actually have the supply under their purview in their hands. As we go along here, I think in the next few weeks, in the next few months, we'll give updates, obviously exactly specifics and things like that. Right now, it's about where their best capabilities are and where their best buildings are. And in kind, they get to access for them and all their defense industrial-based customers the final products.
But who owns it? Like, are you going to spend money to build it all?
Yes, we will. Like I said, that's why we did a fresh. We have $100 million funding. We're pretty well funded for this. It's a public-private partnership where the Army's benefits are the land. Like I said, environmental. As Tim mentioned, it's not that you can just shoot through because it's the Army bases. You still have to go through things, but you're dealing with the Army and you're dealing with government sites. It's obviously a lot more efficient and easier, and the people behind it want it done. So hopefully that'll help. Especially in our case, as you know, we're doing it in a way that's helpful and better for the environment in the first place, as I mentioned last time I was on.
But contrast that with how long it typically would take if you weren't doing this on an Army base, and you did have to work with different stakeholders within a municipality or within a local government.
It would take much longer. Nobody in the government moves at the speed of light. The Army, on the other hand, is its own, I would guess it's its own entity in some way, shape, or form, and they can move things and they move fast. Army is the best we have.
You talked about the environment, and we were talking with our own Joe Doe, who follows all this space, and one of the questions that came to mind is if you guys plan to metallize yourself, and this is where you strip away the oxygen, you convert the raw rare earths, right, and the mined earths into metallic elements. But you guys have been working, I think, on a process that is better for the environment. So what can you share with us on that?
So we've come up with a way of hydrofluoric acid-free processing. As you know, I mentioned last time on the show, the processing currently that we do is in Saskatchewan. As I mentioned, rare earth, we're mainly focused on heavy rare earths. I believe we're one of the only one that's specifically focused on the military defense industrial base, which is what they need. It's the heavy rare earths, and most of those have uranium and thorium radioactive materials. Saskatchewan is permitted for that. That's where it's easy to do. The metallization that you mentioned, which is taking it once it's in powder form to turn it into metals and then from there into magnets, that's definite that it's going to be here in the U.S. The processing for the moment is still in the North America, but still in Canada at the moment. And we'll see how that goes in as far as bringing it here.
But you will be doing it, and I'm just curious, if you do, how do you work alongside in conjunction with companies like Vulcan, USA Rare Earth, and Energy Fuels?
So some of the companies you mentioned are in the magnet business, some of them are in the mining business. We work with some of the ones you mentioned, and some of the ones are just irrelevant to us. But for the most part, this is not. I've always said that Realloys was not a company, with a mine and trying to make a business at the end. We're more of a consortium of all the right partners. Mm-hmm. And now with the Army, the best partner of all, and that brings the government as well and all their capabilities, etc., to make this a mine to magnet story. So all of the above with all of the companies that can help us or be, like I said, some of them are magnet makers. We're in touch with them, qualifying materials with them and things like that. So it's not a non-competitive thing where you have your own thing and you can't talk to anybody else.
Libby, one thing I want to ask you, and if you go back 6-8 months, I feel like Tim and I were nonstop talking about this in terms of rare earths, and the government just talking about it a lot too. Is the U.S. government for this area and beefing up production here in the United States, is the support the same? Is it more, or is it a little bit less?
The support from the government is from all different sides and all different factions of the government. It's all there. They're happy to help. They're eager to help. And this, again, with this deal with the Army, it's them helping behind the scenes, and anything that can help us with the partnership is things that they're offering. Again, it'll take time, but I think you'll see more from us on that later. But the U.S. government under this administration has created this business where it's a viable business. The G7 and the caps that they put on with the 60%, that helps the China dumping, which I was asked about that previously. It helps them on the light side, definitely. In our case, there's a law of DFARS on January 1st. Anything and everything that the government can do to make sure that in the next few years, this is a North American business, this is an Western ally business, they're doing. There's no question this administration has done more for this sector than anybody else. I couldn't imagine anybody doing more.
That's what I wanted to talk about, and I want to try to get specifics about your expectations from how the U.S. government is going to help. And certainly we have the Army basis element of this, but I mean, does it get to the point where members of the U.S. Armed Forces are actually doing work for you?
I think that's still to be ironed out, so don't want to speak ahead of myself, but the answer, I think, is yes.
Wow.
They'll be involved. They want to know the processes. They can follow. I mean, it's on their base ultimately, so they can see how, what, when, and where it works. I think it's in the best hands when it's there, but it's still a private company, private operation as a partnership. It's a public-private partnership.
What are you waiting to hear still from the government about commitments?
At the moment, we're just seeing all that it's going to take. And as I said, first step one is figure out where the best place is, what's there, what the capabilities are, what they can help with on whether it's the environmental side or other sides. And then we're always talking to them about funding to scale up in a bigger and bigger way. They want as much as possible in their purview, and they want as much as possible in America, obviously. So anything they can do, and it comes down to funding as well from various departments, they're eager to help, and we're in talks to try to get done on the scale that we want to get done in the time frame that we want to get done. The production that we'll do this year and the production we'll be doing in the beginning of next year is a start, but there's still quite a defense space with all the wars going on, with everything that's going on. Every missile that goes out, a little more rare earth is depleted.
Yeah.
Every AI system, every GPU, all of that needs heavy rare earths. Every GPU has 13 grams of dysprosium in it. So all of these things need rare earth, and there's a lot of it. So
yeah.
Hey, every time I ask how to cook something for dinner, Carol, I'm using a rare earth, I guess.
You are.
Sorry about that.
Every time you pick up your phone. Hey,
literally, the vibrator in your phone is made from that vibration, the shutter on the cell phone. All of that is rare earth. Everything in our way of life, and this is why it's so important for the country. Everything in our way of life, not just militarily to fight wars, but everything you touch, the humanoid robots of the future, the computers, the AI, the GP, everything. It's all rare earth. This is the new oil. I said it to you last time.
Libby, just about a minute left here. The U.S. ban on Chinese sourced rare earths. We kicked off this segment talking about kind of the G7 and what they are looking to do to limit, the reliance, if you will, on China. Without these, would your business be viable?
So again, in our business, we're mostly focused on heavies. So the law in January 1st is you can't buy with a Chinese nexus. And we have a non-Chinese nexus. I think we're the only ones today that have a non-Chinese nexus completely. That's already in operation. So but there's the other companies, as you mentioned, some of them that are in the light business. The G7 is helping that with their, caps and curbs and other things that they're doing. I think ultimately what you'll see is in the next, let's call it 3 years, I think you'll see that this is not a Chinese American thing anymore. It's Western allies have their business, and China can help themselves to all that they want. But they're doing everything in their power, and they continuously meet and try to figure out new ways to do this. But we're in Realloy's case.
Got it.
We're good. The law is in our favor.
That was Lippy Sternheim, president and CEO of the U.S.-based mine-to-magnet rare earth company Realloys. And in a related story, just wanted to point out a great story on the Bloomberg this past week. As the U.S. is trying to rebuild its domestic supply chain for rare earth elements, it is facing a challenge in actually finding talent to run the facilities. And so this story gets into how that scramble is luring one 86-year-old back from retirement. So highly recommend you check out the story.